to keep timing me then.
Yeah, don't worry, that's all right. That's what we've got that there for as well. And I always keep an eye on the time.
Oh, there we go. Right, let's get going.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 5:30. Gosh, that sounds like it's crackerjack now, but it's not. So we're going to start. Welcome to today's planning meeting of 24th of June, and I would like to welcome members of the public. Good afternoon. Councillors, officers to this meeting, and I call upon the clerk, Anne, who will advise us how the meeting will be run this afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that we are live streaming this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel to encourage more people to engage in our public meetings. The proceedings of the meeting will also be recorded. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and turn them off when finished. Please can attendees in person refrain from watching the live stream as this will cause interference for our viewers. Please also ensure that your mobile phones and iPads are turned to silent. We are not expecting any fire alarm testing today. In the event of an evacuation, please leave by the nearest exit and gather in the car park next to the library opposite Tesco. Should members of the public need to use the toilet facilities, please make yourself known to the security guard who will provide access. In accordance with the Constitution, members of the public who have registered to speak will be permitted to do so when invited by the Chair. I have confirmed those entitled to speak. Please note that registered speakers are not permitted to approach committee members or distribute documentation to the committee during the course of this meeting. Each application will be dealt with in the following order. The Planning Officer will present the submitted application and will outline the proposed recommendation in full. Any speakers registered to speak on the application will be invited to address the committee, and this will be taken in the following order. Speakers against, neighbourhood forum representatives, any councillors who are not members of the committee, followed by speakers in support of the application. All speakers will have a maximum of 5 minutes each to address the meeting. This will be followed by questions from members and responses from the Planning Officer. Once questions from the committee have concluded, the Chair will open the application for debate. At the conclusion of the debate, the Chair will seek a proposer and seconder for the application. The proposal must be made in full and include all information such as conditions or reasons. The Chair will then confirm with the Planning Officer if they wish to enter into a period of summing up. Members, if at any point you leave the meeting for any reason during the consideration of an application, you will be unable to vote on that application. I will now hand the chairing of the meeting to the Chair, Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Anne. Anne, can I ask you, are there any apologies or updates with the membership of the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that Councillors Paignton and Verdi send their apologies for this meeting.
Thank you. Also, moving on to the minutes, can I confirm a correct record of the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 29th of April 2024? Proposer? Have a seconder? Councillor Strang? All those in favour? Thank you. Moving on to declarations of interest. Do any members of the Planning Committee have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on any of the items on today's agenda? Please raise your hand. Councillor Fox.
Just to avoid any kind of apologies. Up until 2007, I was chair of the trustees of Brunel Manor, but since then I've had no non-pecuniary links with the organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Moving on to officers, do any officers here have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on any of the items on today's agenda? That's no. Thank you, Anne. Are there any urgent items, please?
No, there aren't.
Thank you. So we're going to move straight on then to item 5. This is to consider an application for Eastern Esplanade and Preston Promenade in Paignton. It's application P 2023-0905. Clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I will therefore ask Emily Elliott to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. To provide members with an update, we have received one additional representation since the publication of the committee report. This additional representation raises concerns about an extant planning permission for a replacement Geopark cafe kiosk granted in December 2021. In terms of other additional information we've received since the publication, we have had a response from the Design West panel, which was received on the 14th of June. The headlines taken from that, if you've not had the opportunity to read the response yet, is that the scheme is exciting and provides a significant generational opportunity. It's commended for its community engagement. It would benefit from a greater narrative. The response to Paignton's character and context was well considered. However, the response to Preston could go further. The panel sees the potential of this proposal with some additional focus on items, particular elements to be forward-looking, ecologically sound, sustainable, coastal defence scheme with high-quality public realm opportunities. There has been a few additional responses from WSP on behalf of the local highway authority. There was one received on the 13th of June. However, at the end of last week, they did update their response. Nothing majorly different apart from the rewording of one of the 5 conditions which related to the stopping up. Instead of it being a pre-commencement condition, they were saying prior to the first use. But that will come later when I say what other additional conditions I will need to add. And in terms of another additional response we've received is from Active Travel England. They're recommending deferral as they're not currently in a position to support the application and request further assessment, evidence, revisions and/or dialogue. Their recommendation remains that the contraflow cycle lane should be provided with physical protection from reversing vehicles, or the arrangement should be redesigned to improve visibility and reduce the risk of conflict between motor vehicles and cyclists. And the last update in terms of consultation responses was from the Geopark Management Group, and they are supportive of the proposal. As just mentioned, there are a few additional conditions that I propose on top of the committee report. These relate to road safety audit, the pedestrian infrastructure and the stopping up. So going into the application, the following 2 slides are of the site location plans. The one before you is of the Eastern Esplanade to the Paignton Sands. As mentioned, it comprises of 2 parcels of land. It's rather large, so I couldn't fit it all on one screen. But basically, the site location plan before you encompasses the Paignton seafront, which includes areas of beach, existing coastal defences, promenades and access points from Esplanade Road. The site area of this one and the following one, which I'll show you in a second, is 3.49 hectares. Just to point out a couple of places of interest so we're definitely sure of which areas we're talking about. Hopefully you can see my laser on the screen. So we've got the Paignton Club over to the left-hand side here. We have Esplanade Road, which is the main road, what runs along towards, well, up here is the Paignton Town Centre. And then this is Eastern Esplanade Road that runs along Paignton Seafront that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. We have the View Cinema and the Costero Lounge, which was previously the Harvester that I'm circling here. The Adventure Golf is approximately in this location, and the Geopark, an existing kiosk, is in this location. Paignton Pier, which is outside the application site, is over here. And as we make our way over to the right-hand side of the Paignton site, we have the Redcliffe Hotel. And then the site location plan now shows a partial element of the Paignton Sands, and then we have the break between the two, which is taken up mainly by the Redcliffe Hotel. And then the other red line polygon here is for the Preston Promenade part of the application. So we have the boathouse approximately here. And then we have the existing area where we have seasonal beach huts running along. There's the existing primary coastal defence that's already in place. We have, and then the cycleway that runs along the back, which is outside of the application site, and the disused toilet block near Marine Parade. Here's an aerial overview of the site. I'll just pop my laser off a second, sorry. Okay. So the southern boundary of the application site that covers Paignton Sands is within the Roundham and Paignton Harbour Conservation Area, whereas the northern boundary of the Paignton Sands parcel of land is within 15 metres of the Polsham Conservation Area. It's important to note that the application site is adjacent to several Grade 2 listed buildings, including the Redcliffe Hotel, the Paignton Club, Parkfield and the Harbour Light Restaurant. The application site includes sections of the South West Coast Path and the National Cycle Network, and the application site is located within flood zones 2 and 3 as designated by the Environment Agency, as well as being within a critical drainage area. The application site and the wider greens on both Paignton and Preston side are designated as local green spaces within the Paignton Neighbourhood Plan. It's important to note that both Paignton and Preston Green are designated as urban landscape protection areas and community investment areas. The Paignton Sands parcel is located within the core tourism investment area as designated by both the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, and part of the Paignton parcel falls within the Paignton town centre boundary. It should be noted that there are a number of non-designated heritage assets within the application site, including the existing pedestrian shelters, which are sporadically placed along the seafronts, the seawalls and Paignton Pier. The application site is directly adjacent to the Lyme Bay and Torbay Special Area of Conservation and Torbay Marine Conservation Zone. The site is approximately 1 kilometre away from Roundham Head, site of special scientific interest. So here is the proposed layout. So it's an overview and you can see there are 8 inset maps on this. So the proposal before you today is for the installation of coastal defences and associated works along both Preston Sands and Paignton Sands. The proposed works will include 1,163 metres of primary flood defence wall and associated steel flood defence gates. I'm now going to take you through those inset maps that you could see just to give you a bit more context. So the proposal here, if I put the little laser back on, so Paignton Club's over here. We have the exit that the cars go along, currently the one-way system, and they exit onto Esplanade Road. And then we have the seawall, which the first floodgate is across the access road, and then the seawall commences along. In terms of the width, at this point, it varies, but at the greatest point, it's 15 metres in width. And as shown on the fly-throughs before the meeting, you could see that that's the creation of embankment and terracing of planting and seating areas to help disguise the defence and provide an enhanced and accessible public realm. There'll be sloped access, which is suitable for all users, up to the relocated and refurbished public shelters. And then there will be, you might not be able to see very clear because it's such a tiny plan, but there is a little dotted line just before the red line up here, and the dotted line shows the extent of the embankment to come. There's a lot of cycle parking along the promenade, and there are informal pedestrian crossing points throughout the scheme on Paignton Sands, so you can see these from these areas here, which are a different colour and texture to the highway. There'll be elements of seating as well, not just within the terracing, but there will be some cubed seating along there too. There will be a new vehicular access from Esplanade Road that, as discussed at the briefing, the parking and existing arrangement in front of Youth Cinema will be untouched, and then instead of vehicles exiting straight out at the moment on the giveaway onto Esplanade Road, there will be a giveaway point here where vehicles can either choose, if they so wish, to go left up towards the one-way, and then they'd have to continue along to exit via Paignton Club, or should they choose to go right if they didn't want to visit the seafront and then exit onto Esplanade Road. And that's also demonstrated in this inset up here too, which is of a tracking plan just to demonstrate that point. There will be a contraflow cycle lane as well, which will run along in the grey area. This is very similar to the existing arrangement that we already have in place. And then in terms of, I'll try and zoom for a minute. See how good that is. There we go. So in this area here, once vehicles go up this one-way system, they can choose to go left. There will be a number of disabled parking spaces, and there will also be a loading bay. This is to be used for the kiosks that will run onto the next layout, and there will be a turning head feature here, so vehicles are able to manoeuvre around and then exit along Eastern Esplanade. In terms of moving on to the next layout, so just to give you a bit of context, so this is the Costero Lounge that was formerly the Harvester area. Shoreline was back over here. Over here we have the Geopark Cafe. This element of the proposal removes a number of parking spaces as detailed within the committee report. This will create a public realm space for pedestrians and cyclists, and you see there's a dedicated cycle lane that runs along here. It's important to note there are a number of, again, crossing points for pedestrians, so as this is a heavily utilised space. In terms of the kiosks, there are a number to be relocated, some that are already existing on the stilts along the beach, as we're all fully aware that are there seasonally. They'll be placed onto here. There will also be first aid and beach management huts located, and there will be a new Geopark Cafe and seating area in this location. Apologies, I forgot to put my laser back on.
Miss Elliot, can you just wait a moment? Your laser's not working.
Sorry, it should be now. I think I forgot to click the button. Sorry, I'll just quickly, do you want me to quickly go back through?
I think that's okay, just,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
And as you can see, along the scheme, there are a number of floodgates, again, to provide accessibility for all users. It's important to note as well here that on Esplanade Road, where we're going up the one way, that we currently go up the one way and we can either split left or right, depending on which side we would like to park on. Obviously, the right-hand turn will be removed for this public realm area, so all vehicles will have to go left along. You can see from this white area here is the existing public toilets, and then as we go into the parking area, again, there are informal crossing points to prioritise pedestrians using the space. And then this is the last layout of the Paignton element. So this is working away again along more informal crossing points, more floodgates, the relocation and refurbishment of the public shelters, and then the Redcliffe Hotel over here. Moving on to the Preston layout. Just to remind ourselves, over here is the boathouse, and then along here we have the seasonal beach huts, and the seawall will be sited in between the two rows, the landward and the seaward side beach huts. And then as we move along, there will be regrading and reprofiling of the existing access arrangements. There'll be areas for paddleboard and kayak storage, as well as beach lockers to ensure valuables are safely stowed away while people use the beach. There'll be elements of seating across the promenade too. Sarah's Cafe will remain where it is and ensure this spill out area as well for that use. And then the final proposed layout for Preston, moving our way along over here, we've got the disused public toilets, and we've basically got the continuation of the wall with a number of break points for public access, and floodgates to ensure that this will all safely be in place when the bad weather comes. Just to provide you with some context and levels, as I say, we've seen the flyovers earlier, but before us now we've got sections. So the left-hand side basically gives you the site location plan of where the sections are taken. So again, Paignton Club's down here, up here's View Cinema and the Geopark. So starting on section A, which is very close but not quite to the Adventure Golf in this area here. The level changes show that there's the embankment from the Paignton Green, and the gradient ensures that the grass can be maintained. At section A, the height increase is approximately a metre, going from 4.5 AOD to 5.5 AOD. At section B, which is by the Adventure Golf, which we can see here, we've got the, sorry, I should have said the existing and the proposed. The existing sits below, and you can see the reprofiling of the ground. The height increase is approximately 1.1 metres. approximately 4.43 AOD to 5.5 AOD. And at section C, where we are very close to Castero Lounge, the height increase is approximately 1.17 metres from 4.33 AOD to 5.5 AOD. Moving on to the following sections along Paignton Sands, section D and E are very close to the Geopark, and at section D there's an increase of 1.19 metres from 4.31 AOD to 5.5 AOD. Section E sees approximately 1.16 metres from 4.34 AOD to 5.5 AOD. And at section F, which is beyond Paignton Pier and beyond the public toilets, is approximately an increase of 0.9 metres from 4.6 AOD to 5.5 AOD. And then the final section on Paignton Seafront is just a little bit further on. It sees a height increase of approximately 0.8 metres from 4.56 AOD to 5.5 AOD. Then moving on to the sections for Preston, we have 3 before us. We've got one close to the boathouse, which is section H, and it sees an increase of approximately 2 metres from 3.9 AOD to 5.5 AOD. And at section I, a height increase of approximately 1.34 metres, which is from 4.56 AOD to 5.9 AOD. And at section J, a height increase of approximately 1.24 metres from 4.66 AOD to 5.9 AOD. Just to remind ourselves from what we saw earlier of the fly-through, so these images are of the Paignton Sands. So we've got the new Geopark kiosk here and the Geopark that runs behind. We have this area where it currently is an element of parking to be removed, and an enhanced public realm space with the cycle lane running through, and the relocation of a number of kiosks. And this illustration is of Preston. This is from where there's currently a whole host of different access points down onto the Preston beach, stepped down slopes, and then in this area we can see the naturally stone-clad wall, and then the kayak, paddleboard, beach lockers, and the existing shelter. It should be noted that the beach huts are obviously there seasonally, as we well know. It will be tested whether or not the landward side beach huts can remain in place in the winter months when the seawall comes into play, but this will have to be tested on whether or not there will be any damage to such. I'm going to flick through these if that's okay. If anyone needs me to go back later, I can, but I've got a number of proposed elevations now, and we're starting at Paignton Club, going along Paignton Seafront towards the Redcliffe Hotel. So this is the first section of the Paignton Seafront with the proposed wall shown in grey and the existing public shelters in the back. Here we've got these might be more familiar buildings. It's kind of where Shoreline and the View Cinema or the stepped access up the back is at the moment. Moving along, this is kind of the Geopark area along here. Going on, this is going further, so beyond the Geopark, heading towards Paignton Pier and the public toilets. And then the end by, I believe that's the end, or there's maybe one more. Oh yeah, that one. And then the Redcliffe Hotel's here. And then in terms of the proposed elevations for Preston Seafront, again, you can see the wall in the context of the height of the beach huts. So they will be visibly screened during the spring and summer months. And again, some further proposed elevations. In terms of the key issues and material considerations for this application, the principle of development, this proposal is considered to be a critical piece of infrastructure required to help Paignton and Preston from high tides and easterly winds, given the existing coastal defences are insufficient, which affects a number of properties, and that was evidenced today in the extent of the flooding video I showed you earlier. The application site is located within local green spaces. However, it's considered that the proposed development is an important piece of infrastructure that is needed to support the regeneration of Paignton and to protect the existing built environment, therefore constituting very special circumstances. There are no development plan policies indicating that the proposal is not acceptable in principle. Moving to the design and visual impact, the applicant undertook extensive community and stakeholder engagement and commissioned a seafront master plan in 2022. The proposal is for 1,163 metres of primary flood defence, approximately 24 floodgates, the resurfacing to the lower promenade, a new geopark cafe, landscaping, public realm and associated works. The application site is located within 3 urban landscape protection areas. It's considered that the proposal would not have an unacceptable adverse impact on the urban landscape protection areas in terms of undermining their value as an open or landscape feature, and it's considered that the proposal would make a positive contribution to the urban environment and enhance the landscape character of the urban landscape protection areas through enhanced public realm and landscaping. A number of planning conditions are proposed within the committee report to ensure that the scheme provides a high quality design. Now turning to impact on heritage assets, as previously mentioned, the southern boundary of the application site covers Paignton Sands, is within the Roundham and Paignton Harbour Conservation Area. The northern boundary of Paignton Sands is within 15 metres of Polsham Conservation Area, and the application site is adjacent to 4 Grade 2 listed buildings. The existing public shelters, seawalls and Paignton Pier are considered to be non-designated heritage assets. It's considered that the proposed development would provide a positive public benefit to the heritage assets east of the railway line, given the reduced flood risk afforded through the implementation of the proposed scheme before you. The Council's Principal Historic Environment Officer has concluded that the proposed development would overall have a positive impact on the significance of the heritage assets identified within the application site, surrounding area and beyond, further into Paignton. Subject to planning conditions to secure suitable materials and a detailed method specification for the repair and repurposing of the existing public shelters. In terms of residential amenity, subject to the planning conditions detailed within the committee report, it's considered that given the siting, scale and design, the proposal would not result in an unacceptable harm to the amenities of neighbours in terms of their outlook, privacy or access to natural light. Now moving on to highways access and highway safety. The proposed development will alter the existing vehicular access to Paignton Sands, as previously shown in the proposed layouts. The current one-way Eastern Esplanade vehicular access from the 2-way highway will remove the split that currently exists at the head of Paignton Pier. There will be parking removed to make a pedestrianised space. The proposal includes the provision of a new vehicular access adjacent to View Cinema that will include a new turning head to allow the short section of 2-way road to be used for loading and disabled parking spaces. The proposed development does not propose any changes to the existing highway layout or parking arrangements along Marine Drive. And in total, there will be 74 parking spaces removed from the scheme to make way for the enhanced public realm section. There will be additional cycle parking provided across both Paignton and Preston Sands, and the proposal has incorporated British accessibility standards, step-free access routes where possible. The proposed development includes 1 in 21 slopes to ensure the seafronts are accessible for all. There have been concerns raised over the contraflow cycle lane. However, this is an existing arrangement and the proposal is not considered to worsen such. In terms of landscaping, subject to the planning conditions set out in the committee report, the proposed development is considered to be acceptable in terms of landscaping. Turning to ecology and biodiversity, the application site, as previously mentioned, is directly adjacent to the Lyme Bay and Torbay Special Area of Conservation and Torbay Marine Conservation Zone and is approximately 1 kilometre away from the Roundham Head Site of Special Scientific Interest. The application site is also within the Great Crested Newt Consultation Zone. A habitat regulations assessment and marine conservation zone assessment have been undertaken, both of which have been approved by Natural England, subject to securing the mitigation measures outlined in both documents. The application does not require the provision of a statutory 10% biodiversity net gain, as the application was validated prior to February 2024. The proposed development does, however, achieve a net gain, and therefore the proposal is considered to provide an acceptable biodiversity net gain. Subject to the planning conditions set out in the committee report, the proposal is considered to have an acceptable impact on ecology and biodiversity. In terms of flood risk and drainage, the application site is within flood zones 2 and 3, as well as being within a critical drainage area. The proposal has a design life of 120 years and will provide a 1 in 200 year protection to properties in Paignton and Preston. The proposal is considered to pass the sequential test and the exceptions test. The Environment Agency and the Council's Drainage Service Manager raised no objections to the proposed development. In terms of low carbon development, subject to the planning conditions set out in the committee report, the proposal is considered to be acceptable. And finally, in terms of designing out crime, subject to the planning conditions set out in the committee report, the proposal is considered to be acceptable. Overall, the proposed development is considered to represent sustainable development economically through providing flood protection to existing and future businesses and through the construction of such. Socially, through providing step-free access routes and ensuring the seafronts are accessible for all. improving cycling, legibility and safety, and enhancing the public realm to encourage opportunities for social interaction. And finally, environmentally, through significantly reducing the risk of coastal flooding to both Paignton and Preston. Overall, the proposal is a crucial piece of infrastructure that will provide essential flood resilience for Paignton and Preston. Therefore, the officer recommendation is approval subject to the conditions outlined below, with the final drafting of conditions delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following Planning Committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions or obligations. Thank you.
Deep breath. Thank you very much, Miss Elliott, for a very detailed overview and summary of such an important scheme for Paignton and Preston, and something that will be, if it's approved, something around a lot longer than any of us will be around. So it's massively important for the Bay. Committee, we've actually had no registered speakers for this item. So I'm just going to open it up now for questions to our planning officer. And a little reminder, please focus your questions on only matters not already covered in the presentation. Thank you. Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. So, first question, please, Ms. Elliott. If we turn to condition 12, which relates to the bird nesting season. So, I just wanted to understand a little bit about the appropriateness of that condition and whether the wording is what we want. Are there any alternative solutions that we're aware of as an authority to the proposed works to do the sea defence? My understanding of that there aren't. And I also believe that there's a very important public interest in undertaking these works. And so on that basis, I wonder whether the condition that we've got is too tightly drafted, because I believe we might have an EROPI test that might be relevant here. In other words, imperative reasons of overriding public interest, which where there are no alternative solutions and a very, very large public interest in doing this, would allow the works to proceed even if in that example birds were found, if compensation was done. I just wondered if I could have some thoughts on that, please, from yourself and maybe also from Mr. Cattrall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. So the condition 12 was suggested by Devon County Council's ecologist. I fully understand what you're suggesting in terms of the tightness of the condition and it potentially preventing the works to commence. I'm happy to take an alteration to the condition if you see necessary.
My suggestion is that as drafted it's extremely restrictive, and my suggestion, and I'm conscious that the recommendation is for the final drafting to be sorted out by officers and delegated authority on that. My suggestion is we allow an EROPI test to be provided in there in that wording, because I'm not aware of there being any alternative solutions other than the scheme we have before us. Maybe that's something we can cover a little bit more in debate. And on that basis, I think that there would be an overriding public interest in doing these works, and that therefore I wouldn't want them to be stalled because of an inability to proceed. And I think if we could do appropriate compensation should the need arise, hopefully we won't find this problem, but I wouldn't want us to find we're stalled on that approach. So maybe that drafting could be reflected on, perhaps. Thank you, Chair. That was my first question. And then separately, turning through to conditions 21 and 22, these cover the proposed soft and hard landscaping. Clearly how it looks is absolutely really important to the delivery of a scheme because, that will befit the location. Are you confident, please, Ms. Elliott, that those two conditions suitably cover the need to, for example, have plants that are hardy over the long term in an exposed coastal location, material finishes that will be durable over a long term. Are you confident that the wording of those two conditions is sufficient to deliver that, please? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. In terms of the soft landscaping, you'll have seen within the submission that there are a number of drawings. However, I was slightly concerned for the lack of detail. That's why I suggested the wording I have. I think it is very important we have a coastal herbaceous mix there, and we make sure that the species and size, etc., are suitable. So I'm happy for the condition. I think it does cover that. And I've also got condition 10 to ensure that the soft landscaping within and around the development is to be maintained for the lifetime of the development, which hopefully then there should be no decay to the scheme.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ms Elliott.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions. First one, we have an existing flooding problem in the centre of Paignton, as many of us know, and quite severe basement flooding. And I just wondered if this scheme will help in any way at all. I realise they're kind of probably separate causes, but it would just be interesting to see whether there'll be any additional benefit from this scheme before us now in relation to the existing basement flooding problem we have. And my second question is really on the security of the funding. How confident are we that we will have the funding for this scheme? It's an incredible scheme, and I think we're all in support of the principles of it. It just seems great. But I just wonder how realistic it is in terms of the mega funding that will be needed for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I'd like to invite Dave Stewart to answer the first question in relation to the basement flooding question, and then Tim Jones to answer the second question in relation to funding, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Yeah, with regard to basement flooding, the basement flooding in the central area of Paignton comes from, as you said, a number of different sources. Yes, when we've had coastal overtopping, basements can be flooded. So the scheme as designed will alleviate, I won't say remove, it will alleviate, so it will reduce that risk of flooding from coastal overtopping. We also have groundwater issues in that area of Paignton and surface water flooding issues in that area of Paignton. So groundwater will not be addressed by that. It's very difficult. The only way you can address groundwater flooding in basements is to tank the basement and make certain that you can't let the water come in through the ground into it. Basement should be designed in that way anyway, and have that work done. The surface water element of it is, as we're saying, rainfall running onto the surface, running off and flooding it. So the proposed scheme will not address that. However, we are currently, as the council with the EA, looking at a surface water flood alleviation scheme for the central area of Paignton, which hopefully will provide further protection to those areas in the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Fox, I'll deal with the second question. Yes, so in terms of funding, we received some fantastic news in May this year from the Department of Levelling Up, who confirmed that we'd been successful securing £7 million funding. That in itself presents some challenges. They're the right challenges to have, and one of the reasons we're optimistic of securing a positive outcome tonight, we need to be in a position where we've committed all of that £7 million in its entirety by March 25. So working backwards from that, and we may get further questions that talk about programming and delivery, you can appreciate we're really up against it. So good problem to have, but the £7 million is secured. The other element of the funding is from the Environment Agency, or the main funding, we've currently got £3.1 million that's physically in the bank from the Environment Agency, and there's £571,000 also from Future High Streets funding. So that's secured funding. We prepared an updated business case in December last year. We've been through that in detail with the local branch of the Environment Agency, and we've got their full support. That has gone off to the effectively the head office, if you want to put it that way, of the EA. We are currently seeking funding up to a maximum of 9.8 million, and we're optimistic to receive a decision on whether we've been successful on that in the next few weeks. So in terms of what we've got secured, it's around about £11 million. As I say, we've passed all the local checks. The way things work with the Environment Agency is that if you have the support of the local office, that goes a long way to getting that funding secured. So within the next couple of weeks, we're optimistic to have the green light for funding on the whole project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fox.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you. I just seek a little bit more information, please, about parking arrangements. I think we're losing 75 parking spots, and there's not much concern at that, I understand, because of the two existing named parking facilities in town nearby the railway station, which I think is usually at capacity whenever I see it, and Victoria Car Park. And I just wonder if you could just, so that was 75, just sort of, do we have a sense of the capacity at the car park and what it runs at? Do we have any sense of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madison. So in terms of the loss of parking, there would be 74 spaces lost within page 32 of the committee report. I've copied a table on the parking modifications to the Eastern Esplanade in Paignton. So in terms of just giving you an update on the parking, currently there's 2 disabled parking spaces, and the proposal will increase the provision by an additional 8 to give a total of 10. In terms of standard car parking spaces, there are currently 207 spaces, and there will then be a reduction of 82 to give 125. So balancing between the disabled and the standard parking, the total loss would be 74. The local highway authority have confirmed that the loss of the parking is considered to be acceptable, given that the application site is within close proximity to Paignton Town Centre and Victoria Car Park, which has approximately 420 car parking spaces and is less than 300 metres away from the application site. As you've already noted, there is the railway station and the bus station nearby for other sustainable means of transport. However, it's considered that obviously the loss of parking would significantly enhance the public realm area, and given summer and the spill out from the geopark and people wanting to use Paignton Beach, it's considered that the loss of the parking is sufficiently justified. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, but that wasn't quite what I was after. I was trying to understand what the existing capacity in town is like currently. So whenever, as I've said, the train station parking is pretty full almost constantly. So what is the situation, do you know, in the Victoria Street parking?
I don't have those figures to hand for you. I'm not sure whether my colleagues have done a parking study on this or if Tim Jones is able to assist. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I can probably offer a little bit more information. Yeah, I mean, I've personally been involved for around about 3 years of public consultation on this project, and it was really interesting that the one item where the public were completely split, almost 50-50, was on parking. I think anybody who rode a push bike didn't want any cars on the seafront, and people who clearly enjoyed that space were clearly very reluctant to lose the parking. So it was quite a hot topic. Separately, within the engineering team, we're currently looking at a piece of work looking at Paignton as a whole. Obviously, there's a lot of current development proposals going on. Obviously, the Garfield Road car park, which has been very dilapidated for many years and almost completely unused because it's been unsafe, has recently been sort of part demolished. We're looking now at a wider strategy, looking at what is left and what the impact is. So there'll be probably more of a hybrid solution. I think it's fair to say in the summer months we get peaks, air show, other events where we need to provide some temporary provision. And then looking at the longer term strategy, we're currently doing a wider review of those numbers. So I think, as Emily has said, there was also a lot of concern about the interaction between people, bikes and cars on the seafront, and that was reinforced quite strongly actually by Active Travel. They wanted us to look to segregate bicycles far more formally. They wanted us to put them on the seaward side. Unfortunately, there was not enough room to do that, so we've kept the situation as it is currently, with a lot more sort of definition between cars, bikes and people. So it's a valid concern. I think on balance, there was a lot more positivity about the cars generally being removed, and hence why we've got that central section that's now going to be pedestrianised and designated for events. So it doesn't fully answer your question, but hopefully it goes some way to offering some reassurance that the wider picture is being considered.
Thank you. It's reassuring to know that there is strategic thinking going into think about that for the future. So
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions, colleagues?
Sorry, just one further one. Really, just to ask whether. I mean, I note that the marine management body has not responded, and nor has the geopark coordinator responded according to the report. And I was wondering what significance should be attributed to those facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madison. Just to provide you with an update, the Geopark Management Board, which I may have mistakenly put as the Geopark Coordinator, has responded and is supportive. Hopefully their response was viewable before the committee meeting for you. They're just keen to ensure that there's enhancements to the public realm, but are very supportive of the proposal before you. And in terms of the Marine Management Organisation, we are still yet to receive a response. But given how urgent the application is, it's come to committee without a response.
Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate we've probably covered this, but for absolute clarity, I wonder whether officer colleagues could just talk us through the absolute necessity of this scheme and whether there are any alternative options available. Just providing some background to the question that I asked earlier. That would be helpful, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Billings. Yeah, we actually looked, when we actually did the original business case for the scheme to the Environment Agency first time back in 2019, we did try and look at as many options as possible, and we basically found no options that would actually work. The nearest option, we looked at a couple of things. We looked at, obviously, the scheme as it is at the moment with the secondary defence along the seaward side of the green. We did look at a second option of the secondary defence on the landward side of the green. However, that didn't stack up because obviously every time you had a flood, you'd flood the green and any of the businesses on the green would be flooded. Also, it was a question of how you drain that water back. And bear in mind, with the wall there, you could have had a metre depth of water sat on the green. And that was even more a larger depth when you looked at Preston. So that was actually discounted at an early stage. The only other option really that anybody could really come up with as a sensible option was to looking at raising the height of the existing sea wall. So that was looked at, but because of the way wave action works, it needed to be about 3 metres higher. So people have said, why does raising the height of the existing wall need to be far higher than the secondary setback wall? And basically what happens is the waves come in, they break over the existing wall, so you get less, it brings the height down, less wave power into it, and therefore the secondary setback wall can be lower. So the other thing with obviously when we said, yeah, we could do a 3 metre high wall, we'd have to virtually rebuild the wall because the foundations wouldn't be strong enough. But also, you wouldn't have any visibility from the green to the sea. so it was discounted on that ground. They were actually the only three sensible options that we could come up with. We looked at rock armouring to break it all, leaving it in. Yes, it reduced it somewhat, but it didn't give the 1 in 200 year protection. To get granting aid funding, we needed to get the 1 in 200 year protection to it. So various other options were discounted, and we were virtually left with the scheme as it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I'm interested in the floodgates, because there are quite a lot of gaps along the seafront in the walls as they are at the moment, and then the access roads off Esplanade Road. How are they going to operate, and who is going to be responsible for operating them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Tolchard. Yeah, so I'm speaking on behalf of an architect now, so you'll have to apologise for my crudity. But essentially, the principle is that where there's current openings, where they're strategically positioned in good places, those have been retained. Where we've got elements in the public realm design that is effectively filtering pedestrians or cycles in particular routes, again we've utilised those positions, but in conjunction with that, as you rightly identify, in the event of a storm brewing, we need to get our dear friends at Swissco along there to close the gates. So the brief we had from them was that one person ought to be able to close the gates, so you don't need a team of 5 people to close every gate, and clearly there needed to be a sensible time period. Now, fortunately, with easterly storms, you tend to get, in the main, a couple of days advance warning. So it isn't sort of an emergency situation in its truest form. But nonetheless, as you'll appreciate, we've got 800 metres at Paignton, we've got 400 metres at Preston. So it's quite an exercise closing all those gates from end to end. And we got the added challenge as well, that it occurred to us early on, we actually have to lock the gates open, silly as that sounds, in times where we haven't got storm conditions. Otherwise, I'm sure some of the locals would decide it would be fun to actually lock the gates shut when we don't need them shut. So there was quite a bit of science went into it, but in summary, we're sort of balancing the sort of the change, I suppose, to the public. I've lived in Paignton all my life, and at the moment you just wander seamlessly from, particularly at Paignton, from the green onto the frontage, and that's going to be quite a culture change for people. But if we created too many openings, it would just be an impossibility to open and close these things. So that was the rationale. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you, Councillor Tolchard.
Okay, colleagues? I'll open up for debate now then. Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. I think all the evidence we have before us indicates that without the scheme, there'll be a high likelihood of flooding to large sections of Paignton in the future. And so on that basis, we know there's very clear need for a flood defence scheme like this. Thinking through some of the original consultation work that was done with the community, there was original suggestions about a bluff wall, and I think that was something that, in my view, wouldn't have been something that would have been appropriate in this location. But what we've got here is something that I think seeks to enhance the space and create a sea defence in a way that doesn't obviously read that it's a sea defence. It flows into the landscape. In one area it's hidden between beach huts. In another area it's hidden by what I would describe as a ha-ha, i.e. gradually rising slope, and then a stepped bank on the other side. And so I would suggest that what we've got is something that seeks to bring forward a necessary flood defence scheme in a way that's appropriate for this prime seafront location. And on that basis, I'd be quite happy to move approval, unless other members have any other points they'd like to make in debate. I think it appropriate that that we do apply appropriate conditions to ensure that the delivery of the scheme is as high quality as we've all seen in the YouTube videos, and that's why I'm grateful to Ms Elliott, who's gone through and looked at the detail of those. I am cautious about the restrictive nature of condition 12, and I would encourage officers to reconsider the wording of that afterwards in accordance with the delegated authority that you've got, and so on that basis I'd be happy to propose approval in line broadly with the officer report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Billings. Councillor Fox. Yep.
Can we just come in on those conditions just for complete clarity during
Absolutely.
the meeting rather than afterwards through delegated powers?
Thank you, Councillor Billings. In terms of my update at the start of the presentation, I also suggested the inclusion of 3 additional conditions for the road safety audit, the pedestrian infrastructure for Pier Road and Eastern Esplanade, and then the stopping up condition. Are you happy as well for those?
Yes, I am, for absolute clarity. So the inclusion of the ones in the report and the ones you identified at the beginning, subject perhaps to some consideration of whether there's the opportunity to redraft condition 12 subsequently, please.
Okay, and the delegation to word those 3 conditions appropriately?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Have we clarified the condition 12 change?
Yes, we'll seek advice from Devon County Council as well, and make sure that's followed up in an appropriate manner.
Okay. But if there's no further debate and we're clear on what the proposal is and second is, both. Do you need to say anything else? Okay. Thank you very much for your complete agreement this time, Councillor Fox. Let's go to vote then. All in favour? Thank you very much, everybody. That's been approved.
Yeah, that's fine. Within the conditions, anyway, they've got so yeah, that's fine.
That's okay, Councillor Strang, thank you. We'll now move on to item 6. This is to consider an application for Seabury Hotel, which is based in number 11 Manor Road in Torquay, and the application number is P2023-0721. The clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting, and I'm therefore going to ask Miss Elliott again to introduce this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you is for the Seabury Hotel, 11 Manor Road in Torquay. The hotel has not operated since the COVID pandemic, and it's a detached Victorian villa that has been heavily extended over the years. As you can see from the site location plan before you today, when we went out on site, we entered the site here on Manor Road, the existing vehicular access point. We went in and around the site to where the disused swimming pool is, and then following that, we took a brief stop over on the corner of Manor Road with Stanley Road. As you can see from the site visit today, the application site is a two-storey property enclosed with prominent stone walls and mature trees and hedgerows. The proposal before you is for the demolition of the existing building and outbuildings and the construction of 14 two-bedroom apartments, landscaping, parking and associated works. Just to provide you with some context, so here's Manor Road running along, Stanley Road running adjacent to the site. Here is the application site. The site's within the St Mary Church Conservation Area. On the opposite side of the road here is 205 St Mary Church Road, which is a Grade 2 listed building. The application site is designated as Flood Zone 1 and is within the critical drainage area. Moving to the existing site layout to provide you with a bit of context, as you'd have seen from the site visit earlier, the site is relatively flat. The existing car parking arrangement is here, and the historic Victorian villa is approximately in this location here. There's a swimming pool, and we stood approximately here earlier. There are several small ancillary buildings within the site. These run along this edge of the application site. We didn't go as far as that today, but they're there. And there is evident two-storey flat roof additions to the building. Turning to the existing elevations, this is the northwest elevation, so this faces Manor Road from where the vehicular entrance point is. And here you can see the historic Victorian villa core and the two-storey and single-storey flat roof extensions. Moving to the northeast elevation, which faces Stanley Road, and we saw glimpses of this elevation today when we stood on the corner approximately over here on site earlier. Moving on to the southeast elevation, this is the elevation we saw when we were at the rear of the site, and the swimming pool was approximately where the laser is at the moment. And then the southwest elevation, this was the view we had when we were stood within the car parking area. The existing floor plans show the layout to be a 23-bedroom hotel, and the car parking arrangement was for approximately 12 vehicles, which had to suit both staff and guests. Here's the existing roof plan. You can see the arrangement of flat roof extensions around the building and the hipped roofscape at the Victorian villa core. The proposed layout maintains the existing vehicular access from Manor Road. The proposal provides 14 car parking spaces, of which 2 are for disabled users and 3 would have electric charging facilities. As mentioned on site, the green areas are the retained trees. The pink dotted areas are for the trees to be removed. The areas here, the little polygons, are new trees to be planted. The bin storage area is located here, and the bin collection point is here. They are enhancing the visibility displays at the vehicular entrance, and they are stopping up and closing up the existing pedestrian access point just on the corner near Stanley Road. Here are the proposed elevations. So it's the northwest elevation. So this is the elevation that faces Stanley Road. So earlier when we went out and we stood on the pavement, we were stood approximately in this location. Manor Road runs along here. So as you can see, it's 3 stories in form. It's got a range of roofscapes and it changes in its scale and massing. The proposed building would be finished in white render with intermittent use of grey render, and the hipped roof would be slate. It's approximately 36 metres in width when it faces Stanley Road, and it has a turret feature which you can see here. At the highest point, the building measures approximately 10.8 metres in height. And then turning to the northwest elevation, this is the elevation that faces Manor Road. So the access point would be over here, and the car park, to provide you with some context. And then we've got the southwest elevation. So this is within the parking area. When we went to site earlier and we stood and we looked at the building, this is then what you would see. And the southeast is where we stood when we were to the rear of the building today. This is just to provide you with some context for the proposed street scene elevations, so from Manor Road and then from Stanley Road. Just to be clear, this is the proposed development and the neighbour to the right-hand side when on the opposite side of Manor Road looking into the site. And then this is, we were over here earlier on site looking down towards Stanley Road and the neighbouring property, which you couldn't see given the existing vegetation. Here are the proposed floor plans, the ground floor and the first floor. The pink areas denote the 2-bedroomed apartments, and the orangey pale yellow colour here is for cycle storage. And then we've got the proposed floor plans for the second floor and the roof. Again, the pink denotes the residential units, and the orange pale yellow colour denotes the plant area. As you can see from the roofscape here, there are a number of dormers proposed, and the turret feature as well that you can see. Here's a site photograph, so the view from Manor Road. This photo was taken a little while ago, so it looked a little bit different today, but it still gives you the same context, hopefully. And then here's another site photograph. Actually, this is where we all stood to congregate and look at it from Stanley Road. So hopefully that provides you just with a quick refresh. In terms of key issues and material considerations, turning firstly to the principle of development, the site is outside of the core tourism investment area, and the loss of tourist accommodation to residential use is considered to be acceptable given the nature of the area, the limited passing trade, the fact that the site does not benefit from sea views, and the declining revenue in its former hotel use. The NPPF and the development plan support brownfield development subject to there being no significant adverse impacts. It's important to note that the council has got a significant housing shortfall. However, the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply, and permission should be refused where either the application of policies within the framework that protects areas or assets of particular importance provides a clear reason for refusing the development, or any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The committee report outlines the moderate but less than substantial harm to the St Mary Church conservation area and the setting of 205 St Mary Church Road, which is a Grade 2 listed building. Turning to the design and visual impact, which also includes heritage impacts, the Victorian villa in the application site dates back between the 1980s to the 1860s. It features stucco elevations, sash windows, a Welsh slate roof and generous grounds. It has had a number of insensitive extensions, however the historic villa core remains. As I've already previously mentioned, the site is within the St Mary Church conservation area and within the close proximity to 205 St Mary Church Road. The conservation area character appraisal sets out that the Victorian character of the area is fundamental. However, it should be noted that the site is not identified as a key building. A number of historic bodies have been consulted on the application and have responded to the application, which can be found within the committee report. The Council's Principal Historic Environment Officer has used Historic England's tests and concluded that the building is a non-designated heritage asset. The proposal has a larger footprint and is greater in height, which is considered to result in an unduly dominant building. It's considered to lead to moderate but less than substantial harm to the St Mary Church conservation area and the setting of 205 St Mary Church Road, and the loss of the building would lead to the total loss of its significance as a non-designated heritage asset. It's considered that the public benefits, namely 14 two-bedroom residential apartments, is not considered to outweigh the identified harm to the heritage assets. In terms of residential amenity, the site is in close proximity to the St Mary Church District Centre and Plainmoor Local Centre, so it's in a positive, sustainable location in terms of access to services, facilities and amenities. All the units before you comply with the nationally described space standards, and as seen from the proposed layout, it provides sufficient communal outdoor amenity space and is not considered to result in detriment to result in a detrimental impact to neighbours. Moving on to highways movement and parking, it maintains the existing vehicular access from Manor Road. It provides 14 parking spaces. However, it's important to note that the former use as a 23-bedroom hotel had less parking spaces. Therefore, the proposal before you is considered to have a lesser impact on the highway network. The proposal is considered to provide an acceptable level of bicycle storage. In terms of ecology, biodiversity and trees, it's considered to have an acceptable impact subject to plan conditions should permission be granted. In terms of flood risk and drainage, it's considered to be acceptable in terms of surface water drainage, again subject to appropriate conditions should the application be approved. In terms of low carbon development and climate change, the application is supported by an energy statement and is proposing to use electricity as the fuel, air source heat pumps as the heating system, and will reduce CO2 emissions. It's considered to accord with the development plan policies on such. In terms of designing out crime, no details have been provided within the application, but can be subject to a planning condition should planning permission be granted. And in terms of the viability, the applicant has submitted a viability appraisal which was independently assessed. The assessment concluded that the previously approved 2021 scheme is unviable and the current scheme would therefore deliver a reasonable profit to the developer. In terms of the officer recommendation, it's one of refusal, subject to the reason outlined in the committee report, with a final drafting of the reason delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following Planning Committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Elliott, for that. We, committee members, we don't have any speakers against this application, so I'm going to move straight to those who speak in support. First of all, I'd like to call Mr. Mike Cowdrey on behalf of Torbay Neighbourhood Forum to speak in support. Mr. Cowdrey, you have 5 minutes. And the clerk will let you know when you've got 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. This statement has been reviewed and approved by the steering group of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. The Forum objected to the previous application P2022/0908. This building was too large and the style was incompatible with the St Mary Church conservation area and neighbouring buildings. This application was subsequently withdrawn. We were pleased when the applicant developed a new, smaller and less intrusive scheme and came to present the proposal to the steering group of the forum. We agreed that this was a much more acceptable scheme when compared with the original scheme, as you will see from this slide. When planning consent was sought, we prepared a policy checklist which has been sent to you and submitted a consultative response in support. As you will see, much of the checklist is green, showing compliance with the policies. However, we note that compliance with policies SS10 and TH8 was borderline in terms of the relationship with the Victorian villas in that area of St Mary Church. The St Mary Church Conservation Area appraisal shows that the Seabury Hotel is not listed, is not a non-designated heritage asset, nor is it a key building or part of a group of buildings of architectural importance. The Forum disagrees with the late designation on page 70 of the papers to make the building a non-designated heritage asset. It has been significantly extended in the past, such that it has lost much of its original characteristics. The next slide shows some neighbouring modern incongruous properties such as 213 St Mary Church Road, which was approved despite numerous objections included from the Forum. What you have in front of you today is nothing like that. This slide shows approved developments that are close neighbours in Manor Road, not too far removed in design from this proposal. On that basis, we agreed that the proposal was an acceptable compromise, particularly as it is a brownfield site and will contribute 14 dwellings to the much depleted housing supply. This tilts the planning balance in favour of development. The Forum concludes that in this case, the harm to the conservation area is minor and is outweighed by the benefits of the proposed development. The new building's design is now of a size, scale and architectural style that accords with other properties in the area. If refused for heritage reasons, this case raises concerns about consistency in recent planning decisions. For example, Singleton Gardens was approved in spite of demolition of a non-designated heritage assets. Hotel Virginia was rightly refused because it would have involved demolition of non-designated heritage asset. And Merida was retrospectively approved despite unauthorised modifications to a Grade 2 listed building. I'd like to emphasise that this is a very different situation from Mouse Cottage Maidencombe, approved at your March meeting, where the forum and local residents strongly objected to the incongruous design because of non-compliance with design policies SS10, TH8 and TH12, which is specific for Maidencombe. Indeed, it seems as if planning officers are not taking account of the views of the neighbourhood forum, which represents the community, and are directing you at variance with community opinion. Given the amount of effort volunteers have put into developing the neighbourhood plan, as well as cooperating with the planning function, this is both disappointing and disturbing. The applicant has also engaged with the St Mary Church Community Partnership, who supported the proposal, so I hope you will recognise the overall community support.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. The policy checklist is the result of a thorough, objective review of compliance of the application with development policies and takes considerable time to complete. The forum requests that you, as elected representatives of the community, will agree with the checklist you have before you and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cowdrey, and apologies when I said Torbay, not Torquay. Tongue twister. I'd now like to call on Mr. Alan Griffith on behalf of the St Mary Church Steering Group to speak in support of the application. Again, Mr. Griffith, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when there's 1 minute to go.
Right, thank you very much. Good evening, Chair and Councillors. I'm speaking on behalf of the St Mary Church Community Partnership, of which I'm a member of the steering group, talking about Seabury Hotel planning application P 2023-0721. The St Mary Church and District Community Partnership is pleased to support this application. The partnership objected to the previous application, P 2022-0908, on the grounds of non-compliance with development plan policies, particularly in terms of its overbearing design that was incompatible with the conservation area, and the underground car park was thought problematical for flooding and fire risk. We were pleased to see that application was withdrawn. The hotel industry is one of Torquay's key contributors to its remaining a seaside town with a thriving economy. It provides accommodation to visitors and employment to locals. Competition has become strong with development of more modern hotels and operations such as Airbnb entering the market. Many of the older hotels look tired and the owners can't afford the upgrade needed to compete with new builds. The expectations of customers have increased such that older hotels can no longer provide the facilities needed, such as ensuite bathrooms for all rooms. Sadly, the Seabury Hotel falls into this older category. An attractive hotel in its day, many additions have made it unsightly. Although near to the prized Babbacombe Downs, it is outside the core tourism investment area, CTIA. However, it is within the St Mary Church conservation area, so it must fit in with surrounding buildings. The developer engaged with the steering group and the community partnership to share their proposals for a revised project. This newly proposed apartment block, which will replace the hotel, is in proportion to the other buildings in the conservation area and in keeping with their design. It is not another unsightly glazed box like, for instance, 213 St Mary Church Road. It has good design, and this was achieved by the developer liaising with the council's planning department to see it complies with the requirements of the conservation area. We consider that the building is well designed, modest in height, and has on-site ground level parking. It complies with Torbay local plan policy SS10 and Torquay neighbourhood plan TH8. Therefore, the St Mary Church Community Partnership asks that you reject the case officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith, for your statement there. Finally, I'd like to call on Mr. Martin Hill, the applicant, to address the meeting again in support. And just a reminder as well, Mr. Hill, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when 1 minute's to go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. It's much appreciated. I just wanted to run through with you, I suppose, the background to this and where we feel we are. I'm not a planning specialist, so I do apologise if I haven't got the planning, shall I say, detail. When we decided to withdraw the application that was referred to earlier, we really wanted to engage with as many people as we possibly could to get something in place that would work as well as we can get it to work. In particular, from the point of view of design, massing and scale, which is why we engaged with the local groups and also with the local planning authority as well to ask the question as to what would be an acceptable form and an acceptable design approach. Something we also had to take into account was that the extant consent that we have that was for 12 apartments and maintaining the core of the old villa had, because of the huge increase in build costs and various other issues, become financially unviable. It just doesn't work. So part of the process that we went through was to get a viability study done by a third-party company, and we also went out and got a heritage consultant to have a look at the whole heritage issue, because we were obviously very conscious of the fact that we didn't want to be in contravention of any of those things. So first of all, when officers considered that the perceived heritage impact represents a clear reason for refusal, which, if you like, trumps the presumption in favour of sustainable development, we simply don't agree with that statement. Further, officers consider that the public benefits to housing supply and the economy would not outweigh the less than substantial harm to designated heritage assets. Again, we disagree. Torbay at the moment can demonstrate 2.17 years of housing supply, which represents a significant demonstrable shortfall. And the shortfall has been persistent over many years, and the situation appears to be perhaps worsening. The adopted local plan is out of date, the emerging local plan has halted, and at present there's no viable plan-led solution to remedy this shortfall. And so perhaps significant weight should therefore be attached to the delivery of housing. This is a brownfield site in a built-up area in a sustainable location, reflecting the objectives of the NPPF, the adopted local plan, the neighbourhood plan, and the emerging local plan to provide housing on brownfield sites within settlement boundaries. And just to re-emphasise the previous comments, the Seabury Hotel is not a listed building, neither is it identified as a locally as a key building or anything. There is no designated importance from a heritage perspective listed against that building. I think the replacement of the building is now of a scale and massing which represents the prevailing context locally too, as previously mentioned. And we did take on board the comments made to us about scale and about massing and about design. and hence we were very pleased that both the Torbay Neighbourhood Forum and the St Mary Church Community Partnership saw fit to support the application in writing. They've also mentioned a couple of other examples. There's an application that was succeeded in Keysfield Road in Paignton in July 23, but that was something that was quite a different building. It was a listed building, I believe. If I could now turn to this aspect of viability, because that is something obviously is a very key consideration for us as a developer. We carried out, or we had a third-party firm of consultants carry out a viability report. That viability report basically confirmed that the 12-unit scheme as approved a couple of years ago was no longer viable, and that the only scheme...
1 minute remaining.
The only scheme that is viable is for 14 units. We also, at the officers actually requested a validation of that report, and in fact we had a third-party firm, William Lean, who actually looked at our report and confirmed the content of that report to say that a 14-unit scheme was the only one that was viable as it stands financially. So just in conclusion, the proposal we believe represents sustainable development. It's located within a built-up area in close proximity to community facilities. It brings back a vacant brownfield site into appropriate use. It's a commercially viable development if the 14 units is approved. And we believe the demolition of the existing building is justified and proportionate to its relative significance and contribution towards the conservation area. And the traditional and sympathetic design approach will ensure that the overall impact on the development and the setting of the listed building is not harmful.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I'm afraid that's your 5.
I'm not very good at keeping...
So members, I'm going to invite questions now to the planning officer. Again, may I remind you, questions should cover matters not raised already in the presentation. Councillor Strang. Oh, sorry.
You've got that bit. On the significance of the existing villa, I would just like to ask the question of, is there anything within the existing villa, either externally or internally, that makes it significant or would be a massive loss if this scheme were to go ahead?
Thank you. So in my consultation response to the case officer, I used Historic England's established criteria to assess whether it was a locally non-designated heritage asset. That looks at its type, its age, its rarity, its architectural and artistic interest, group value, historic interest, and whether it's a landmark building or not. So this describes each characteristic that I've just mentioned there and whether the building meets that particular criteria. With regards to specific detailing and what have you, they came to the conclusion that there was external and internal detailing, and the heritage statement outlines some photographs of that that was submitted within the application. It takes into account that yes, there has been unsympathetic alterations and extensions in the past, but looks at what is remaining. So in answer to your question, that has been done within that kind of table of assessment within my consultation response, and with the conclusion that it did fit the criteria to be a non-designated heritage asset.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Can I just get an understanding on consultation? I seem to be getting mixed messages here. I wonder whether somebody could just explain to me exactly what consultation has taken place and with whom.
So in terms of consultation, in terms of the public or consultees, so in terms of the public, there was a site notice and neighbour notification sent to all relevant adjacent neighbours. And in terms of the consultees, within the committee report, all of the consultees have been outlined. Would you like me to list them, Councillor Fox? Or
I mean, thank you for that answer. I'm just wondering what kind of consultation there was with the community rather than with the consultees. I mean, I got the impression from the applicants that there has been consultation with the community, and are we aware of that, and what kind of weight would we put on that?
The application, as Emily just explained, that, you know, it's been out to our normal consultation. We take that into consideration. We've had a number of representations. We obviously take and listen to the various consultations we've had and we've heard tonight. But it's all balanced against, you know, some of the criteria that's been explained by our Principal Historic Environment Officer. So we've got no details on what steps the applicant and agent took, but we can certainly say that our procedure was followed in terms of its engagement.
Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Cowdery for a very helpful presentation. And just following up in relation to one of the topics that he raised, he was talking to me about how this application sat for the purpose of consistency in relation to some other developments such as Mouse Cottage in Maidencombe and also Hotel Virginia. I wonder if Ms. Elliott, Mr. Palmer, you could just talk me through how you see this, how you see things from your perspective in relation to those. I wonder if you could talk to me about the relative importance of the building that we have here in terms of it being a non-designated heritage asset in relation to how important you see Hotel Virginia, for example. I wonder if you could talk to me on that basis and also answer some of the other questions about the appropriateness of a more modern development in Maidencombe, but not, for example, here, and in relation to the Torquay neighbourhood plan policies. Thank you.
I think with respect, we're dealing with a single application here. There's some points of principle here, isn't there, about the integrity and professionalism of our heritage officers and our team. I think, you know, we've applied everything with the same test, the same rigour. You know, we've got, it's appropriate to challenge those, and listening and taking account of voices and consultation is an integral part of the planning system. And you can see by our reports just how far the depths we go into to make sure that applications accord or do not. And all those are really valued. So the checklist, the table, that particularly Torquay Neighbourhood Reform are very good at providing that information, but we have to balance that against our own criteria, established through legislation, national policy, local policy. And with respect, I find it really difficult to hear of those other examples that are far and away completely different to the one we're dealing with here. There's some points in principle, but they're contextually very, very different. And I know colleagues have reached out and met with Torquay Neighbourhood Forum and had a discussion about heritage assets and our planning process. And it's something I really want to make clear, that it's incredibly important that we've got a positive, trusting relationship with Historic England, National Minority Heritage Fund, and we've got a team of heritage professionals, and we have to make those difficult, challenging choices. We do listen, but at times the balance is tipped the other way, and in this instance, the balance is tipped towards preserving the building, with a lot of balanced other arguments and considerations taken into place. So I'll let our Principal Historic Environment Officer answer the next question, but I think to make that point that there's a huge amount of professional integrity goes in these points, and I do not think that Planning Committee is the place to challenge those. Thank you.
Just to add to that, so in regards to the process that I go through for assessing those different applications are the same. There's established criteria, established guidance, established policy. The flow from receiving an application and what you look at in regards to heritage impacts is exactly the same, going through all those different applications. With regards to, I think the second part of the question is with regards to its actual value as a non-designated heritage asset, with the linkage to Hotel Virginia as well. I would say, yes, very different context, sites and what have you, but both similar in the sense that they both make a positive contribution on assessment to the conservation area. It wasn't marked as a key building, this particular one within the conservation area appraisal, but when you come to assess an application, that's when you look at building it in more depth, and when you make that assessment. And as I responded to a previous question, that criteria was followed I came to a conclusion. That's a conclusion that's also been reached by Historic England with regards to, and I'll bring up their notes and their response. And I think Emily touched on it within her presentation in regards to the Victorian character and specifically villas within their own grounds being absolutely fundamental to the character of the St Mary Church Conservation Area. And in their response, they outlined quite clearly that the building as is had been detrimentally impacted in regards to previous past alterations, but still made a contribution to the conservation area, which was positive and therefore warranted its preservation. So in regards to thinking about Hotel Virginia in this one, very different settings, different conservation areas, but a similar kind of argument in regards to what Historic England would come back with and the value of the building itself and the process exactly the same in regards to those and any others with the heritage assets and the conservation areas as well.
If I may just develop that line of thinking. So I personally don't see that Mouse Cottage was a useful comparator, but I would like a little bit of help from officers for, in your words, explain why you don't see it as a helpful comparator. With Hotel Virginia, I think that's a useful thing to compare against. When I look at Hotel Virginia, I can see quite a lot of with the assistance of yourselves to interpret the front of the building, a lot of what was originally built there in front of me. In relation to this building, I find it difficult to see a lot of what was there originally built because it's obscured by other development that's been very unsympathetic. Do you find that pulls away from the quality of the non-designated heritage asset to a degree, and if so, to what degree, please? Maybe you could just help me with those two separate points. I just trying to conscious that I'd like to be able to be really clear on what our public answer is to all of these points. Please, Mr. Balmer. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So the extensions as they are do probably cover more than what they would do on the Hotel Virginia. But the extensions are, there's a structural report that goes with the application itself, and that describes the extension as actually being very poorly bonded to the original structure. And when we look at these types of applications, I know we're not comparing this application with previous applications and what have you, but the consented scheme, which was the previous scheme before the one that was subsequently withdrawn, followed policy guidance in the sense that our first result we want to get, or with regards to buildings and assets to make a positive contribution to a conservation area, is their retention, and when we're coming to convert them is to remove unsympathetic alteration and extension. So that consented scheme achieved that. One of the reasons we probably weighed in its favour for approval. So we know that in regards to those extensions, their removal is potentially possible, and I think were they to be removed, that would only further reveal the significance of the building and its positive impact on the conservation area. So even as it stands, as Historic England and I have come to the conclusion, is that even with those unsympathetic alterations, it still makes a contribution because the original villa is still readable on site, albeit you've got to look at it, you know, but it's still there. You can quite clearly see the original core, you can see the historic extension, and you can quite clearly see the later 20th century extensions as well. You can still read it, but we're also looking at kind of its potential as well to further reveal that significance. And the MPPF really backs that up, and the paragraph numbers, I'll just find that one, paragraph 212 of the MPPF, which states that local planning authorities should look for opportunities for new development within conservation as to enhance or better reveal their significance. So we would say, actually, there is a real easy win to enhance the significance of that site, which is to remove those extensions but keep the building in situ.
I think just to develop your question a little bit more, the first part of that was, I think we've mentioned before that we've got that sequence, that pathway of events to a decision, and what that relies on, that interchange, that sort of exchange of information to get a consensus of what is appropriate. So that pre-application inquiry is incredibly important. Design review panel, the scheme evolves, an application comes in, there's a general consensus from stakeholders, from consultees, that it's supportive. When that breaks down, or that those steps aren't taken, you get to a position where you know, we're in a difficult position to make recommendations for refusal. And some of the examples you've seen didn't follow that pathway that were presented earlier, and that ended up refusal. Where you see the sequence followed correctly, you often see a more positive outcome. And it's just worth reflecting on all those examples we heard on earlier. Different people follow different pathways, there's different significance, but ultimately we're looking for a pathway to a positive decision. I think that's the best way to describe your first question.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think the key message there that this committee must give to all applicants is please go through the pre-application process with the local authority.
That offers you the consistency in terms of approach, that you get a consensus. And that's that sense of collaboration we want to foster with everyone, really. Thanks.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Just another question on housing on this one, really. We're all aware of the housing crisis in Torbay. We're all aware of the lack of affordable housing in the area. And my question really is the 14 dwellings artificially constrained? Could it have been a little bit more to have included some, to have got over that that area, that sort of basis, if you like, for us to, or threshold to, in fact, deliver a little bit of affordable housing? I mean, I don't think we're allowed to ask the developer to come back in again under our sort of the rules that we have. But maybe Jim Blackwell could have a go at answering that one for me.
I think the application, it is what it is, and we need to, you need to determine it based on what's before you. But I mean, it's worth pointing out, I've set out that sequence, that pathway to decision. Was all the information provided? Did they go through pre-app? Did they go for Torbay design review panel? Was there an opportunity to scrutinise all the options as part of viability, or were there just a certain smaller number? So it's part of that pathway I think we're expecting, that we've really communicated through the officer report, presentation, the site visit, and tonight.
Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Elliott, one of the points that came through strongly in your report was concern about the quality of the proposal of the replacement dwelling, or dwellings, not just the loss of the non-designated heritage asset. Could you talk me through about some of your cautions about what's actually proposed in terms of the drawings we've got in front of us, please? Or Mr Palmer, if it's easier.
Sorry, you caught me mid-drink there. Sorry. So regards to the impact of the proposed replacement dwelling, so scale is a considerable issue, and I hope you would have seen on your site visit that when you look around the existing villas on that road, that they're quite kind of what we call human scale, and kind of two-storey, quite actually. The key to their attractiveness and their significance is their simplicity as well. And that comes from not only their kind of built form, their massing, which is fairly restrained, but also their detailing as well. So that can be the windows, their joinery details, their positioning within the elevation, and how all that combines as a whole to result in a building that is of aesthetic value. When you look at the proposals in front of you in regards to the proposed design, its scale is considerably larger than those villas around. I think Historic England used the term elephantine in regards to its scale. And it's like a number of villas, perhaps two, perhaps three, mashed together with an overall massing that makes it, in regards to our opinion, overly large within the plot and doesn't accurately replicate the massing and the scale of the villas that you find around you. Further from that, when you look at kind of the detailing that goes with that, as I mentioned before, simplicity of the detailing is very key for those kind of earlier villas and their significance. The design in front of us is one which I would argue isn't particularly refined. There are various types of window used in the same elevation, which goes against the kind of established architectural principles. It's overly busy. There's banding of varying widths, varying heights, differing wall to void ratios, again on the same elevation. The simplicity of the design is lost in its fussiness, which means it doesn't accurately replicate the villas that surround it. And therefore, as a result, not only the loss of the non-designated heritage asset, but the aesthetic values that would result and the permanent impact that result of the replacement dwellings would be harmful be a permanent harm to the conservation area and also the listed building that we've identified opposite the road as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Palmer.
Any further questions, colleagues? I've just got a couple myself, if I may. We've talked about supply of housing in the Bay and need of extra supply. Have we done any work to find out the range of types of supply we need? So, when I look at the Bay, the smaller type of properties is very much needed for younger people, couples or young families, and they're starting off in the Bay. There's limited supply on that, and therefore the rents have gone up an awful lot, which is causing a lot of trouble for families. When they talk about 14 apartments, 2 beds, is that, how much is that a part of our need? Just like some clarification on that.
Fair to say we have a full understanding of our housing need, and the original approval had a mix of a range of dwelling sizes, 1, 2 and 3 units, 3-bed units, whereas this is uniformly 2-bed across the 14. Maybe Elliot has some additional information on that. I'm not sure how much more additional information. Yes, we do know what the need is, and this is exactly the same across the 14 units.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I was just more checking. Yeah, I know about the previous one. It was more. Now we've got this one where it's 2 beds. They're all uniformly 2 beds, and it's that feel of that particular need within our housing supply, rather than a broad 1, 2, and 3 bed. That's all.
It's certainly not a mix, is it? I think that's what I was trying to establish.
Sorry, I was trying to see if I had if the consultee comments could elaborate on whether or not they were satisfied with the mix. I don't think I had a response from the policy or affordable housing officers in terms of the mix. It is just 2 bedrooms, 14 units before you. So yeah, the mix is very different to that was previously approved.
Thank you. My second question was, is this the only scheme that's viable? I remember the applicant mentioning the last one wasn't. This is the only one in their view is. Have we thought about alternative that's potentially viable, which still solves the problem? Or we got?
It's the only scheme in front of us, and I think, to echo Mr. Blackwell's comments earlier, that the pre-app process is where you would look at a variety of schemes and you could assess their viability and look at preferred options from there. But for the purpose of this application, is just the one scheme, and we've got a unviable scheme previously consented and a viable scheme as part of this application.
Thank you. My final question was, I read how Historic England, if they'd been minded to have looked at the previous one, they would have been more sympathetic to that than the current one in front of us. Bearing that in mind, the previous one, how much of the original which we're talking about here and its significance was then surrounded effectively by the outbuild for the what was then 12 properties?
Thank you, Chair. Just to touch upon your viability thing, just to go back, a question. In terms of the viability appraisal that the applicant submitted before us, there was the approved 12-unit scheme, the 2021 one, the current scheme before you for 14 units, but there was also an alternative scheme that utilised additional stories that contained 24 units. When it went to the independent assessment, the 24 units was not explored any further because we weren't presented with that scheme. So we couldn't possibly comment on that. And then turning to your question on the previously approved scheme and how much of it was affected, I'll just open up the elevations. But basically, 3 sides of the historic core of the building would have been taken back and reinstated as to how it once should have looked. And then when we were on Manor Road today, looking forwards into the site, there would have been a glazed extension from the historic core, and then there would have been a 2-storey flat roof build on it. So in effect, only one elevation would have been affected.
Thank you. Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates more to on the practical level, really. I see the Swissco's waste team manager was concerned about the system that was going to be put in post for waste collection. And he says the specification for the underground recycling and waste storage is not compatible with domestic recycling and waste collections in Torbay. A vehicle with a crane lift is required to empty these containers, which Swissco do not operate for recycling and waste collections in Torbay. And he was asking, or he'd like to see a detailed waste management plan to see how actual waste management would work in the development. Has that been forthcoming at all?
Thank you, Councillor Tolchard. In terms of the waste that was outlined in the committee report, apologies, there should have been an update. The proposed layout then showed a collection point and a storage point, so it wasn't the underground storage system that they'd initially proposed. I hadn't sought another consultation response following that. However, subject to condition, if you're minded to approve, there could be some resolution. So the underground storage is off the table now.
But if you've got any further questions, members, I'll just open up for debate now. Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Chair. I was listening very hard to Mr. Palmer when you were speaking about the status of the house as a heritage asset. What I heard, excuse me if it's a bit pedantic, but as you sort of went through, the first time you spoke, going through the qualities, what I heard was that the house, the core of the house, met the criteria for an undesignated heritage asset. That's what I heard. The second time, and subsequently, you talked about the house making a positive contribution to the conservation area, which is a slightly different thing. And I personally saw it as quite an ordinary building and in bad condition. But you were very clear that just its continuing presence could be seen as being a positive contribution to the conservation area. And maybe I wondered, and in fact I'm of a mind to think that the issue then is whether or not there are sufficient houses already to be making that contribution. That, you know, whether or not that judgment is something I share. I don't share it, is what I'm trying to say. I apologise. I'm trying to say that I don't think that it in and of itself, in the state that it's in, and given the ordinariness of it, makes that contribution. I would say that also I do wonder, you know, there is some, I find personally that there is some harmony and in the proposed in the application, in the proposed plans, which I wonder whether if you did stay with the existing building and developed it in some form to provide greater accommodation, whether or not you'd actually achieve harmony at all, or similar. So I'm just, this is very subjective. This is a very subjective area that you're getting to. Basically, I think it's really borderline. So I think it really comes down to the issue of harm. And then, so I went to the issue of its location in its plot, and I seem to remember that the distance from the boundary was sort of varied between 5 metres and in excess of 5 metres and in excess of 8 metres. And I don't find that too bad, considering some of the things that have come through the committee previously. So I have to say, I am not convinced at the moment that this is an application that needs to be turned down. So I think I've said my say now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mellison. Councillor Fox.
Just following on from Katia, I see this area as quite a mixed area. We do have the Berkshire Court opposite, which is a very attractive listed building, although its impact from this building is slightly shielded by a lot of trees. But then if you go next door to Kenley Court, which we looked at, that's a complete contrast in style, as is Stanley Court on the other side of Stanley Road. So I think we've got here quite a variety of styles within this area. What we heard from Mike Cowdery, Alan Griffiths and the applicant Martin Hill was that in terms of size, scale and style, it doesn't really step out from broadly what's around it. I think it's a well-written report, and thank you for it. And I feel slightly guilty at sort of taking a different view, because you're professionals and you write these things in a way that's we have to respect, and I do. I just think that I again think that's borderline. And even though we're not going to get any affordable housing out of this, we're going to get 14 units. And I just think that's really important, especially as we've got two well-developed or quite prosperous centres nearby, particularly St Mary Church, and not only from a point of view of shops, but other facilities, from surgeries, for example, from schools. And I think overall, unless I'm persuaded otherwise, I will be voting in favour of this development.
Councillor Strang.
I'd like to thank Emily very much for the effort that goes into these reports. I'm probably one of the last ones that would advocate losing an old building. But in this case, I do feel that the line and the style of what's presented to us is sympathetic, and with the appreciation of what Rob has said about some of the detailing, which maybe could be looked at and improved, I'd be mindful perhaps to pass this application.
Councillor Billings.
I think I can totally appreciate what Mr Palmer's set out, that the previous scheme, which effectively took the harmful additions on the original fabric of the original villa back, so you can see the original villa there, and then provided an additional building connected through one elevation only towards the back of the site, so it wasn't a principal elevation, would have been a more preferable scheme. I can totally appreciate that would have been a more preferable scheme. I think the difficulty we've got is we've got to assess the current scheme before us, and there are elements of this scheme that I find problematic. There are details of some of the elevations that I think should and could have been refined through the pre-application process. I think all of the concerns and tensions that are coming through and that are making that have created a situation where we've got an officer report for refusal, where we should really be having an officer report for approval. In my eyes, those could all have been addressed through the pre-application process, and it's in many respects reflecting on this debate. It's frustrating that there was clearly very good consultation with the community. It's clearly that I heard that both the community partnership and the forum were consulted. It's disappointing that there wasn't that similar engagement through a pre-application process with the local authority, and that we're now having a debate in relation to an application that, if it had come to us in maybe a slightly different way, we could have already approved it by now, perhaps. I'm somewhat cautious about the message we send out to the community of applicants to support this when we could have had something better through that pre-application process. But equally, we've got to judge what's before us, and I think the question that members have got to grapple with is it bad enough to refuse? Not is it what we want, because ultimately that's the test that we're asked. Is it bad enough to refuse? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Strang.
Well, from what I'm hearing from members around the table, I think we're possibly to the point where we need to put a motion forward to approve this application moving forward, of which I'll propose.
That will rely on conditions, obviously. We have some prepared. Obviously, that is delegated to officers, the Chair. How would you like to handle that? Would you like us to read out what they are, or are you satisfied that between officers and the Chair we could ensure that they're correct, given the scale of development and the standard conditions we'd usually apply to something of this nature?
I would think we could leave that to your delegated authority to sort those conditions out.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Brooke?
Are we happy? Yep. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Madison. I'll go to the vote then. We're voting for approval, subject to conditions that we've delegated to the officers accordingly. All those in favour?
I would suggest, actually, that we do run through those conditions so they're completely accurate, because I just sense that there's a sense that we need complete certainty as part of this decision. So would you like to run through them just so we're completely clear? And then we can, the actual detail of them, at least you'll understand what you're approving in terms of conditions.
I've done a list of topics or headings. I hope that's okay. So firstly, I've got the construction method statement. Secondly, external materials. Thirdly, window and door details. Fourthly, boundary treatments. Fifth, communal amenity space, making sure it's delivered prior to occupation. 6, no external lighting without consent to the authority. 7, vegetation clearance. 8, construction environmental management plan. 9, accordance with the actions set out in the biodiversity metric assessment and landscape plan. 10, accordance with the ecology report. 11 is tree protection measures, the arboricultural impact assessment, arboricultural method statement. 12, the arboricultural site monitoring and reporting. 13, soft landscaping. 14, hard landscaping. 15, surface water drainage. 16, removal of permitted development rights from C3 to C4. 17, removal of permitted development rights, means of enclosure. 18, designing out crime measures. 19, electric vehicle charging points. 20, bin storage and collection. 21, parking provision. 22, bicycle storage. 23, compliance with the energy statement. And 24, assurance of bills, so when there's demolition we then don't end up with a completely vacant site for a very long time.
Councillor Billings.
I'd like to suggest, Chair, a few other conditions, if I may, which I hope officers can reflect on.
I think perhaps we ought to pause for a moment, Chair, if you don't mind. Perhaps Simon and Jim, we need to do some... it would be helpful to take their advice on that, because effectively the vote's taken place.
Yeah. Take a 5-minute adjournment, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So just a bit of a clarification here. We carried on a vote subject to the conditions that had been prepared by Miss Elliott earlier. Councillor Billings just wanted to raise what he thought maybe a few other conditions, but we need to clarify we can't go back on a vote already. However, I've asked Councillor Billings just to raise his points because my understanding is actually those points are already within the conditions we voted on. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Billings to confirm that, and maybe then Emily, you could come back and reconfirm it's in the conditions.
Yeah, so, Chair, thank you. Just for clarity, the topics that I wanted to ensure that we'd got covered were about fenestration, that's the windows, about the banding works that's proposed on the outside, and about the type of slates that were going on the roof. And if you can just talk me through how those are covered, that would be extremely helpful, please, if they are.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. So under the second condition I've suggested would be external cladding materials. That would cover the wall and roof, so that would cover your type of slate. The third condition would be the window and door details to ensure that the fenestrations are suitable. In terms of the banding works, I would maybe suggest an additional condition to the 24 I'd already proposed, one of detailed design on the elevational treatments to ensure that it did cover banding, reveals, sills, all those other important things that we should be taking into account in the conservation area.
Thank you very much for that, Miss Elliott. I'll call that to an end for this application and move on to the next one. Take 5-minute recess while the officers get ready with the presentation for the next application. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to now move on to items 7 and 8 that are combined. These are to consider applications for Brunel Manor, Teignmouth Road, Torquay, application numbers P 2023-0606 and P 2023-0616. We're going to discuss both applications together, but when we get to a recommendation, we will deal with each application separately. The clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I'm therefore asked Jim Blackwell to introduce the applications.
Thank you very much, Chair.
So apologies firstly for the number of slides, but there's a significant amount to cover, and I'm sure you appreciate that from the site visit earlier. So again, for complete clarity here, you're determining two applications, the planning application and the listed building consent application. I'll deal with these in this single presentation for simplicity, but we'll conclude with both those recommendations. The application site is located in Watcombe, just east of Torquay. Brunel Manor is obviously at the centre of it. It's a large Victoria former manor house with various other residential buildings, groups of buildings, and features all set within landscape grounds. It's first used between 1963 and 2021 by the Woodlands House of Prayer Trust as a conference and Christian meeting centre. You've got Teignmouth Road to the east, which we travelled on and pulled in to the opening to the left. There's a wooded area, large wooded area to the south of Brunel Woods. It's steeply sided banks, as you can see by the topography and the gradient going down. To the west are formal gardens, and just to the northwest you have Seymour Drive. Right to the bottom, away from view here, is Kingsgate Close as well. Within the centre of it lies, as we saw, Brunel Manor. We've got tennis courts surrounding that site, Brunel Court to the north, and Brunel Lodge to the east. You'll notice that this slide contains lots of red areas, and those are all areas for demolition. Moving on to the designations. So this is a range of grade 2 listed buildings, not only the manor, but also the gate piers at the entrance, the balustrading and steps coming down away from the manor house, historic park and garden, 3 group and individual tree preservation orders, the Watcombe Park Conservation Area, local green space as designated with the Torquay Neighbourhood Plan, urban landscape protection area, flood zone 1, sill zone 3, and the John Musgrove Heritage Trail runs along its boundary. This is the Torquay Neighbourhood Plan designations. You can see here the local green space, which wraps around Brunel Manor and towards the entrance. This is the landscape context, so you can see the red line of the site here, the blue line wrapping round on all 3 sides. Green is the John Musgrove Heritage Trail, and the purple triangles are the listed buildings, which you may not be able to make out on this plan. So just looking at the aerial photograph, you can really start picking up the pattern of development. So you've got the residential cul-de-sac to the west. You can see Seymour Drive wrapping round to the northwest. You can see the entrance going past the building called Carousel, which is outside the development site, past the lodge, and this triangle area of land here. Just here is the flag, which is the bus stop, and you can see Teignmouth Road winding its way around, and you can see the density of that sort of managed parkland. What you also pick up, I guess, from the previous slide and this is a truly elevated site looking down over Torquay and wider Torbay. Just some photos just to remind you what you saw earlier, the listed gate piers and entrance with the lodge behind. The lodge itself with its later additions, the flat roof to the front, Carousel in the distance, the neighbouring property. The drive in, the density of trees, Carousel to the right hand side. The car park entrance to the rear of Brunel Manor, you just pick out the tennis courts just on the top right. This aerial view, which I think really makes clear the later additions, so you can see firstly here where the sort of dining room is, the pool, and this later addition that winds its way along topography into the woodland. We walked into Brunel Court and round the gardens, and just going through very quickly the existing plans. So the ground floor, we made our way through the lobby, looked at some of the rooms in here and saw the retention of a lot of features. We also looked through and see the area that was going to be demolished, and we walked through to look at a model which was extremely helpful within the Roddenhurst room up here. The first floor plans, you can see, as we discussed from the car park, just how much these spaces have been sort of carved up with partitions, some going right the way across windows, which is suboptimal. Second floor existing plans, same theme really of creation of spaces and lobbies, and you can see the lift in the centre here, but you can see the space is all carved up. Some indicative internal spaces, some of the grandeur that we saw just as we walked in. Just even for that few minutes that we were in the building, you can see the grandeur that was at the room sizes, the room spaces on the ground floor. And some of those rooms you can see here, very tight partitions. More existing plans, so it's the lodge, existing plans, ground floor and first floor. You can see areas for demolition. This is the core of the original building. Same with Brunel Court, existing plans. You can see here, we mentioned what was going to be demolished with the creation of a car parking court, just in here. And just a reminder of the layout in a very simplistic way. Brunel Manor, the extensive demolition taken away, Woodland Row, the three elements that carve round using the topography nestled into the landscape, Water Row on the tennis courts, Brunel Court, and the lodge. Making that a little bit clearer with the layout so you can see the route in, the bus shelter, which will be turned from a flag, coming into the lodge, wrapping round carousel, parking area, some integration between the buildings, Woodland Row and their gardens, set back against this building line, the parking within the space behind, and then you can see Water Row at the top northwest side of the site on the tennis courts, and we discussed the alignment and the setback of those buildings on site. Just for complete clarity on the quantum, because we did discuss this on site, this is the best way to show you. You can see there, I won't read it out, but you can see the curve conversion within the listed building. You can see the conversion of Brunel Court, Brunel Lodge, and the new build elements. So 17 in the listed building and 18 new build. Just getting to grips here with the scale of demolition and removal of all these later additions, you can see in the ground floor and in the first floor really starts to highlight all those partitions we talked about. Clarity here on each distinct element, so you can see each unit and how it's been the sensitive approach and that narrative of bringing this building back into a full use, minimising any change, removal of partitions, still keeping that grandeur of the space, still keeping the layout as best as possible. And again with the first floor, if you remember this before, so partitions throughout this from left to right, and you can start to see how this will be distinct with the coloration, the distinct units in each part of the building, the listed building. Second floor, exactly the same story. And on the third floor, it's just a small space, kitchen dining area within the tower, which was to the rear of the property. Proposed elevations, we touched on the sort of lack of change really, other than the large-scale demolition to the original building. So very little to show you on those elevations. This was the internal elevation, so we went into the building here, new glazed screens here. Obviously, you have the later additions are currently covering some of these elements. So this is the end of the building. We sort of had our back to it as we started to circle around the building. Fully revealing and finding a new way of exposing that part of the building. An indicative image to try and make sense of that all. So removing that dining area, bringing back a matching ground floor with the canopy, the arcade. Loss of the swimming pool, a huge difference that makes that elevation, and recognising that these balustraded and stone balustrades and steps are all individually listed as well, and you start to see that hint of where Woodland Row will go. Indicative proposed elevations, clear elevations here, but a more diagrammatical approach to just showing how it will assimilate itself into the landscape for Woodland Row. Proposed elevations, a lot of work has gone into breaking these elevations down, moving from what was originally a sort of terrace approach into individual units, using a really interesting modern architectural style with plenty of sustainability credentials. The layout. Water Row, broken down again diagrammatically, so you can see Brunel Manor's here. We saw that change of level, the setback against the tennis courts and the boundary, and then again indicative, the proposed elevations below. Proposed floor plans using that T shape and the inverted L shape, which makes a lot more sense when you see this image. So this is the T shape pushed back against the boundary. Seymour Drive is up here, and you can see the inverted L shape here, keeping that gap between new and old with a walkway between. We spoke about all the removal of a lot of modern additions to the lodge, and that modern contemporary approach to the architecture to the add-on to the lodge, using a differentiated materials. That was an outcome from design review panel. Floor plans, proposed elevations of the court. We went into the court and looked at how these changes would take effect. Removal of the single-storey building, pitch roof building at the front as you go into the courtyard. Creation of car parking, and now that sort of sensitive conversion, making more sense of these spaces, particularly these openings here, which are currently fairly simplistic UPVC openings without any real coordination to their design. The court plans, so they're showing the demolition, keeping cars out by making sure the parking is to the outside. Here, with bin stores, the parking here for Water Road. This is the movement plan. So this is where we started really. On the site here, we talked about the permeability of the site, the really importance to make that east-west connection, so it's not a completely car, demand for the car is not completely secured, so making sure there's pedestrian movement east-west and north-south. And we looked at various different routes that are currently existing, some to be improved as well to make sure that north-south connection is maintained. We talked extensively about the landscape restoration and the strategies that are a part of this application, which are fairly large scale for making sure that what is retained, the quality is retained, it's managed for the future and with new planting. One of the things we touched on as part of the discussion is flood risk. So obviously there's some topography going on here which you need to manage, and just looking at in the report you'll see it's dealt with by attenuation tanks. So just going through the key material consideration, the principal development, significant weight is given to the delivery of brownfield homes. The vacant building credit is being applied as the building is vacant and currently being reused and fully redeveloped. There's no increase in floor space and no requirement to provide that affordable housing on site. Those are the critical elements in terms of the principle are the extensive heritage and landscape benefits. There's a range of Section 106 matters are covered in the committee report, and the committee also confirms that there are no policies indicating that proposal is not accepted in principle. From an economic impact point of view, there's obviously a clear benefit of the creation of new housing. In terms of design and visual impact, again, reinforce what I said earlier about that pathway to a decision, pre-application inquiry, engagement officers back in November 21, through to April 2023, inquiries to Historic England, design review panel September 2022, public consultation and liaison with key stakeholders March till April 2023. And just running through those 5 distinct elements, Brunel Manor, it's got those modern poor quality built elements removed. Really little evidence of the change to the external fabric other than the works of reinstatement and a sensitive response to how to do the internal layout. Water Road evolved to sit comfortably in the space on the former tennis courts. Woodland Road takes its cues from the landscape and sits back into the topography as recognised by design review panel. Brunel Lodge see much of all of its building restored and extended, and that proposed new built element is a entirely new form but using that same scale as existing. And Brunel Court remains largely unaltered. In terms of heritage assets, I've touched on what's listed on site and as part of the report. Also those impacts on Watcombe Park and Brunel on a Grade 2 registered park and garden. That scheme's evolved from those first comments from Historic England, and the elements of demolition are obviously fully supported, and as are the way that the remaining building will be treated. The conversion and restoration works fully supported, and Although both Historic England and Victoria Society raised concerns, which is covered in the office reports, officers satisfied that the limited quantum of development, given the size of the site, the scale and massing of the new build elements and details are sympathetic to the overall setting of listed buildings. Have included a number of conditions to ensure that key elements and materials are appropriate standard, and overall it's considered an enhancement to the designated heritage assets. In terms of impact on landscape and trees, these will be fully consulted with our tree officer, and they've confirmed that the proposal is acceptable now on the impact of trees. That does require various conditions to be included. They have been suggested just to make sure that landscape is managed in the correct way, tree protection is done in the correct way. In terms of residential amenity, committee report confirms that it's got an acceptable impact. Suitable conditions are suggested to control the period of construction. Matters of waste and collection have been resolved through submission of additional information and more conditions, particularly around a waste management strategy, and some access improvements have been included. Access impact on highway and parking. That east-west connectivity will be maintained and improved between Teignmouth Road and Seymour Drive. Access north-south has been included in the scheme now to connect north-west of the site with Brunel Woods and access those facilities to the south. A range of conditions being included, critically the carriageway bus stop, the shelter, and improving the existing footway and the crossing as part of that. And also there is acceptable levels of parking, visitor parking, electric vehicle charging points, and cycle storage. The pedestrian movement, legibility, vehicle access, parking proposals are all acceptable, and those improvements to the non-car access to the site have evolved over the course of this application. I'm just moving through to ecology issues. The DCC ecologist has considered the information submitted and have confirmed that the addition of conditions is acceptable. In terms of flood risk, it's obviously in a critical drainage area. Surface water will be dealt with through the combined sewer system and 2 attenuation tanks. Council's drainage engineer has considered the proposal. This has evolved over time, but has confirmed that the addition of conditions of the proposal is acceptable. In terms of recycling waste, sustainability and low carbon, the principle of attaining, converting, adapting buildings is fully supported. New build elements would be built to an extremely high standard, and those key interventions have been included within the scheme to ensure positive sustainability credentials. Finally, designing out crime. There's a bit of a tension here with a listed building and trying to ensure that those those safety and security measures are fixed in an appropriate way, given the significance of the manor. But otherwise, that's been controlled by a condition. Just to move on, for complete clarity then, we've got 2 applications, the planning application and the listed building consent application. I've dealt with all matters on both reports within this PowerPoint and won't be doing a secondary one for the listed building consent. So it is a recommendation for approval subject to completion of the Section 106 agreement. The conditions outlines below with the final drafting delegated to the Director and resolution of any new material considerations that have come to light to be delegated to the Director again. With the listed building consent, the same again. Conditions outlined below within the report, final drafted conditions delegated to Director, and resolution of any new material considerations also delegated to the Director. Thank you. And just going through development plan policies at the end, just for clarity. So I will leave it on planning application first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blackwell. As I've been a resident for 27 years in Barton and Watcombe, used the conference centre, walked the John Musgrove, and also enjoyed Watcombe Park many times with my family. It's an interesting application here. I'm going to open. We don't have any. Yeah, we haven't got that yet. We do not have any speaking against the application, so I'm going to move straight to those who are going to speak in support. May I just mention that those who are speaking in support, normally it's 5 minutes, but because it's a combined applications, you have 10 minutes. So first I'd like to call upon Mike Caldry, on behalf of Torquay Neighbourhood Forum to speak in support.
Good evening. This statement has been reviewed and approved by the steering group of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. The Forum is pleased to agree with the officer's recommendation for approval. The applicant engaged with the Forum and the Maidencombe Residents Association, and we were impressed by the desire to maintain and restore much of the historic characteristics of the main building and to remove the incongruous structure of the conference centre. The consultee response and policy checklist indicated compliance with all policies except for H2 affordable housing and TA1 transport and accessibility and TA2 development access. As ever, for a development of this scale, the Forum would prefer to see affordable housing on site. However, the location, some distance from hub facilities, and the limited capability for walking, cycling and public transport on the Teignmouth Road mitigate towards covering the requirement via a Section 106 contribution. The Forum notes the exchanges with Highways regarding the bus stop and visibility for safe vehicle exits onto Teignmouth Road with respect to policies TA1 and TA2. We understand the land ownership constraints on enlarging the bus stop area. In view of compliance with all other policies and the positive contribution of 35 dwellings to Torbay's housing need, the Forum supports approval of both this application and the listed building consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cowdrey. I'll now call on Mr. Ian Jewson, the agent, to address the meeting, again in support of the application. And again, reminder, 10 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you've got a minute to go. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today in relation to what I hope you will consider to be a very exciting proposal which will secure the long-term future of Brunel Manor and new homes for Torbay. I'm the planning consultant appointed by the applicant in relation to both these applications. Since starting my career 28 years ago, this is probably the most captivating and thought-provoking project I think I've had the privilege to be involved in. It has involved meticulous planning and a careful balance between the technical and the architectural, something I think Brunel would have at least nodded his stovepipe hat at. The officer's report before you is very comprehensive and explains why permission should be granted, so rather than repeat this, I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about our journey. I don't wish to take up more committee time than is necessary, but I want you to understand how much this means to me, the applicant and the design team involved. The applicant purchased the site in 2021 from the former Christian Retreat, when the former Christian Retreat closed its doors for the last time after 58 years of use. They took their role as future custodians of the property very seriously and immediately sought advice from Devon-based heritage experts AC Archaeology and award-winning designers APG Architecture to identify the best future use for the site. They and their advisors accessed long-forgotten archives to understand exactly what they were dealing with. It was a fascinating and inspiring journey over countless hours which has led us to this meeting today. The site, as you've heard, is within the settlement boundary of Torbay and comprises previously developed or brownfield land where the principle of development is acceptable. The site already accommodates existing residential dwellings within the lodge and courtyard buildings and also lies adjacent to existing residential development. Creating some new homes using existing floor space was an obvious and logical conclusion which had the additional benefit of generating sufficient values to support the restoration of the important heritage and landscape assets. The applicant reached out to the council at an early stage to obtain pre-application advice both in relation to the proposed uses and overall approach to development. Separate advice was also obtained from Historic England via their own pre-application process. After carefully considering the advice received, the applicant commissioned initial sketch proposals showing how the site could be redeveloped whilst protecting important features. The proposal was then presented to Torbay Design Review Panel, chaired by Mark Pearson, who I'm sure many of you will know. The design review involved a site visit and presentation to the panel followed by a question and answer session, and the formal response was provided by the panel with recommendations which were taken on board. The final response said in part, "We would like to fully commend the client body for what appears to have been an enlightened process thus far. We were impressed by the research, knowledge and appreciation of the original building that the consultant team had brought to the exercise. We are happy to support the idea of creating new opportunities for development in the broad locations within the site that you have identified. We recognise that these will be an important component within the overall investment strategy and that considerable expenditure is likely to be necessary in the works to the historic fabric of the original house. Mr Blackwell was involved at all stages of the pre-application process, and we are grateful for his professional input, which has involved numerous site visits and meetings to consider detailed aspects of the scheme, sometimes down to the most minute of details. Advice was also obtained from experts in the field of arboriculture, ecology, highways, heritage, drainage and sustainability to check the designer's workings. The pre-application process, as you can hear, was rigorous and considered both officer pre-application advice and the applicant's strong desire to create a development that everyone involved should be proud of. Before submitting the application formally, the applicant consulted widely with the local community and other stakeholders via a letter drop to over 400 households and an interactive consultation website. The outcome of this process was recorded in a statement of community involvement which was submitted with the planning application. And I would suggest that the very limited number of comments received in relation to this planning application, which is just 3, is a direct result of the care and attention given by the applicant to this aspect of the scheme. The site itself has an existing access onto the adopted highway which resulted in a considerable amount of vehicle movements when it was the Christian retreat. This proposal would result in less traffic movements and an overall betterment to the network. At the request of Council Highway Advisors, bus stop improvements would be delivered to encourage the use of public transport. The existing footpath link from the Teignmouth Road to Seymour Drive would also be retained and a new south link is also proposed. The site, as you've seen, is extensive, but due to landscape setting and heritage assets, the opportunity for new build development is limited. The applicant accepted this at an early stage and has therefore designed the scheme so that existing floor space can be used wherever possible. After careful consideration and in response to officer advice and a Torbay design review panel, a total of 9 new dwellings are proposed in the less sensitive parts of the site. The biggest proportion of the site by far would be retained as gardens or open space for biodiversity enhancement and for landscape restoration. Brunel's vision for the site included a manor house set in mature landscape setting, but regrettably over the years the site has suffered from a lack of investment and maintenance which needs to be put right. A key part of this application therefore includes a restoration scheme to the landscape which would secure the long-term future of this most important natural resource. In addition, the significance of the manor house has been diminished by unsympathetic modern extensions being added to the building, including the principal elevation facing the bay. It is understandable why these proposals were approved in the past, as they were necessary to assist the day-to-day operation of the Christian retreat. However, in order to bring the house back to its former glory, this proposal would remove these unwanted elements so it can be properly appreciated as it should have been all those years ago. Brunel Manor has been in private ownership for over 175 years. However, at the request of officers, an area of public open space would be provided on the site, which would allow greater access for the community and help to encourage active living in a local area. The applicant has also agreed to the requested Section 106 contributions relating to open space, waste, healthcare, highways and education in order to mitigate any effects on the local infrastructure and services. Bringing these proposals to you today has been a very, very long road, so I'm grateful for your time, for the time you've taken attending the site visit, for reading the officer's report and listening to me today. Although the applicant has undertaken in-depth historical research and a full survey of the building, it continues to be vulnerable to vandalism, even despite continuous on-site security and regular visits by the police. We now need your help. We need your help to take the next step and secure the long-term future of this site. I therefore hope you can support these applications. Your support will enable us to take the proposals forward and start preparing Brunel Manor for the next page in its story for all our future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jewson. Now I'm going to move over to committee members to invite your questions to the planning officer, and a little reminder about members' questions only relevant to the not covered in the presentation. Thank you. Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Mr. Blackwell, thank you for the extremely comprehensive report in relation to one of the most detailed application submissions I've seen at any point being on this committee. Could you just talk me through, you described the existing layout of the development with the partitions in front of windows being suboptimal. Could you compare and set that out in relation to the detail that we've got proposed in this scheme, and for example the shadow gaps and the pods, please?
Bear with me when I go through my sizable presentation to find the right slide. Let's reverse it. So here's the proposed plans. Ground floor. We came in through here and you can see the coloured, each different colour is an individual unit. So the retention of these grand spaces, very limited change in terms of what would have been the original layout. As with the first floor, just bear in mind this element at first floor while I reverse back to here. So apologies if that kind of small, but I think that shows the compartmentation of the building, and very easy to see, but you can see here that the building was completely split down into cells for individual units. Just to make that slightly clearer. So you can see here, each is an individual room. This would be removed, and you can see the ground floor actually isn't too bad, other than you've got the dining room, this 20th century extension, and the open space of the Roddenhurst room. Just to then go back again, so we're clear. So you can see how it's being dealt with here. Does that answer your question? Just to make that point, sorry, pods. I didn't include that because I'm already up to 49 slides, but there's a number of pods that have been included here, which are to create the here an upper floor and a toilet, and just to try and get round resolving some of these grand spaces and making sure they're usable. So there's been a number of design decisions about how to do that in a reversible way, whilst being set down, set back, respecting the character of those large-scale rooms. So I hope that covers everything.
It does, thank you, Jim. The building, as I'm sure committee members will also appreciate when we went to see it, was absolutely magnificent. The listing, however, is a grade 2. It's not a grade 2 star or a grade 1. Does that reflect some of the additions that would have been at the that would have been on the building at the time of its listing in 1988, and through these works would therefore the building have a higher heritage value than it would have done at the previous time of listing, please?
At the time of listing, very much so. It would have been swayed by, those extensions that probably wouldn't have been there that long. But in terms of its assessment, in terms of our considered officers, huge heritage benefits for removal of those structures, and you leave it to Historic England to make that judgment on whether it should be elevated to another level of significance. But just by removal of those, you reveal so much more externally, let alone internally.
And the final question, members, on other developments we had reductions in the time duration that an applicant can take before commencing development. We heard from the applicant that they wanted to start work on this scheme. Would there be the opportunity, if members were so minded, to add a condition to require commencement at an earlier stage, or is this being a full application? Is there not the opportunity to do that? Because where we've done it previously were with outline applications.
I'm conscious of the overlap between that and the phasing condition that I've added, that I've suggested. So I agree there's different built elements here as well as the landscape renovation work. So there's quite a few pre-commencement conditions that have been agreed, plus a phasing plan. So I'm quite comfortable that's covered without an additional sort of constraint or control over timing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fox.
Again, I want to congratulate everybody for such a superb report, which takes me back to a time when I was involved quite closely with the Manor. Just want to talk about the affordable housing, and I just wonder whether the view of our affordable housing delivery officer was sought in relation to the situation. I forgot the name of the facility now, where basically brownfield land cancels out the need for affordable housing. There's a vacant building, that's the one. What was the other one? Vacant building consent. So notice on page 127 of the report, I won't be long, but it's on page 127, it does say there's a still a requirement for affordable housing. I accept what's been said about its location and therefore the disadvantages in terms of sustainability for putting affordable housing there. And I note on page 129 that there's an off-site contribution amounting to about £827,600. So my question really is that still part of what we are voting on tonight, that particular figure there? Thank you.
So that office report is in sequence of when those consultation comments were provided. Started with the affordable housing officer back in September when this application was fairly fresh. Took quite a strong view about affordable housing provision. We then took advice and legal advice, and at those iterations you can see in the officer report get to a point where vacant building credit is applied because of the significance of the brownfield land and housing delivery, and making sure that when you look at what was there originally, I haven't got that slide before, when you look about what was there originally in terms of the amount that's going to be demolished, when you look at the quantum development, it's almost exactly the same in terms of floor space. So there's no requirement for affordable housing. That also weighed against the huge amount of weight of brownfield supply of housing, and also all the heritage benefits, the landscape benefits, the open space benefits. When you put all that, the connectivity benefits, when you weigh all those together, that does equate to no affordable housing in this instance. But it's something that there was if you look at the report in sequence, it's quite clearly been through quite a rigorous process to make sure that's correct.
So just when we look at page 129, this off-site contribution, does that no longer apply now?
Those consultation comments are in order, so I was important to put those in to make sure that you see the sequence of an engagement that we have with both from a legal point of view and a policy point of view, that we've got to a point where we accepted that vacant building credit is the right thing to do, balanced with all those benefits and the brownfield land.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say it's such an outstanding site, and therefore really deserving that it should have an outstanding development. And it's actually really nice to see some flair and ambition in what's on display here, and also some respect for the size and grandeur of the existing rooms. There has some resistance to the urge to chop it all up and get maximum yield out of it. So yeah, congratulations. But what I wanted to ask, the simple question, was whether there had been any advance on the arrangements for the car access to the buildings in Water Row, and the bin issue. I noticed, well, I may have read the wrong part of the report, but there seemed to be an issue with the car access there and how that might be resolved.
There was a previous issue, but again, they're in order, so it was resolved through a condition, sort of reversing it a bit, from a condition for a waste management strategy, the swept path analysis for all range of vehicles, the understanding how it would be, the waste will be positioned and collected. So all those issues, when you look at the report, in order, were resolved.
Any other questions, colleagues? I've got one question. Absolutely wonderful to see the landscape restoration that's been proposed. I'm trying to think, though, longer term, the actual management of all the open area spaces that the public can currently go into and would still carry on going into. I was aware, for example, with the Christian Trust, one of the issues and why it went down into a state of disrepair, but certainly hadn't been investment in all those walkways. They ran out of money, so it's a massive area. I just want to get clarification. What's the plans for that actual long-term management? How will that be working, please?
So that's dealt with by condition, and also as part of that restoration plan. It's accordance with that restoration plan, and that does set out some long-term. So not taking away the fact that the density that you saw in the aerial photograph, the way it's been unmanaged, I guess, that unmanaged evolution of the landscape, the management of it, getting back to those trees and landscape features that sort of deserve to be retained. Actually, it's on that slide there. And then fully committing to that, it can only be done in a long-term way. You might see quite a quick short-term change, but actually it relies on condition, the landscape restoration, and then taking some key decisions on some of those more poor condition trees and opening up a lot of those spaces. And there's also the Section 106, so the Section 106 payment contribution to open space as well, and management of that. And that's in partnership with Swissco and Torbay Coast and Coast Road Trust.
Thank you. Councillor Billings.
Sorry, Mr. Blackwell, one further question. The phasing plan that you've got, are you confident that there's, as much as this looks a really, really exciting scheme, and are you confident that there's no opportunity for there to be a situation where, for example, the new build housing was developed and then we never got the fantastic works to restore the existing manor house through that phasing plan? Your condition number one is, are you confident that fully deals with that concern, to ensure that, for example, there's a requirement for other works to be delivered before the most profitable elements are sold, and so, et cetera, please?
I think there's some flexibility in how it's delivered, but the phasing plan, saying numerically, but it's number one for a reason. I think we're really clear that there's various distinct elements here and various ways to bring things forward, from the landscape renovation, the demolition side of things, some of the new builds. There's some quick wins and some longer term things in there. So that is number one for a reason. I think that's one of the most important things, to make sure that phasing is agreed by the local authority.
And just on that, I'm presuming that needs to be a negotiation with the applicant. Has that negotiation happened, or is that likely to, or is that something that still remains to happen, assuming this committee were to grant consent, please?
The first step was making this recommendation for both applications, and then the next step will be to start looking at discharging conditions should you approve.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the provision of primary care nearby, and the fact that the 3 GP practices are up to capacity, therefore a contribution will be required, and the contribution appears to be 21,734, which doesn't seem much to me. I'm not quite sure how that's calculated to sort of cover 3 GP practices, which is interesting. Thank you.
I'm conscious of time and digging that back up, but that is their calculation and that is what they would expect. So that's been included in that in the obligations. I mean, I could let you know precisely, but it might take a bit of time.
Okay, colleagues, if you've got no more questions to the planning officer, I'll open up now for debate. Councillor Strang.
I think from walking around today, we've seen this is an absolutely fantastic site. The main building is absolutely stunning. I think the scheme that's been put in front of us is incredibly sympathetic, with all those modern additions removed and the buildings restored back to how they were intended to be by Brunel. And with the addition of the conditions that Mr. Blackwell's got in there, I'm very minded to support this scheme should that motion be put towards us.
Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Jewson said earlier that this was an exciting proposal. I agree. I think it's an outstanding application, absolutely outstanding application. The level of detail that we've had submitted to us is absolutely superb. It is one of the very few applications where I've first turned to the design and access statement to assist me through a very large number of drawings in order to make sense of what I've got in front of me. And the design and access statement, again, was absolutely outstanding. I think this flows from the exemplar levels of engagement that the agent and the applicant has engaged with. Not only with the community partnership, not only with the neighbourhood forum, but also with officers and members. I would really, and for those watching the YouTube, I would really compare and contrast our difficulty and tensions in relation to a previous application that didn't go through the pre-application process, and our massive congratulations for the amazing result of this one that has. Through this, we're removing quite a lot of built fabric which detracts from the quality of the existing building from key viewing points. If one was to stand on the lawn, one currently sees the incongruous development of the conference centre on the right-hand side. If one was to enter the site from the main gatehouse, one would see the incongruous flat-roofed extensions both on the front and the right-hand side. All of that will be removed. Where the new built form will be is in more sensitive locations. Taking those two examples viewed from the lawn, the new built form will be slightly further off to the right, and it will read as separate and not part of the main house. Taking the other example of the lodge house or the gatehouse, the new built form will be towards the back as viewed from the main gate entrance. All of the ways that this could have been refined to produce a better scheme, it's in there. Taking the examples of the pods, these are sensitively let inserts into existing room spaces, which, if reading the detail of the design and access statement, relates to even the way that they've been designed to flow round the skirting with a shadow gap has been sensitively looked at. I think it's an extremely good proposal. I congratulate the applicant and his agents for it, and our officers and those community members that have engaged with it. I'd be delighted to put it for approval in accordance with the conditions in the officer report, subject to the delegated authority to amend those conditions as appropriate to the Director of Planning.
Thank you, Councillor Fox, for seconding. If there are no further debate, I just ask Mr. Blackwell to sum up, please.
So, just for complete clarity, this is for the planning application, which is P 2023-0606. And I did want to just come back on your point that with the NHS, it says to mitigate the impact to increase the physical capacity of existing surgeries. I don't know what that, I don't know, but I presume that's the physical changes capacities. That may be more staff or extensions to those. But I wanted to clear that up because it's sort of a key point. So, voting first on the planning application.
Yes, please, voting first on the planning application, colleagues. The listed comes next. Those in favour?
Thank you. Then I'd like to take up a vote on the proposal in support or otherwise of the listed building application. Need a proposer, please? Rang to propose, seconded. Councillor Madison. Those in favour? So that's approved, thank you. Well, thank you very much everybody for attending this planning committee meeting. Thank you residents who's been on there. Thank you very much for other gentlemen speaking. Now call this meeting to adjourn and safe journey home.